Samantha Everhart glided into the grand hall with the confidence of a queen, every eye turning toward her as she prepared to make an announcement that would change her life forever. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, reflecting off the polished marble floor, while the aroma of fresh-cut roses flown in from a private estate perfumed the air. The entire Everhart family, along with influential acquaintances who often graced the pages of society magazines, paused mid-conversation. Nobody knew that Samantha's world had been quietly shattering for months. Tonight, among the clinking of crystal glasses and murmurs of anticipation, she would deliver her bombshell: the end of her marriage to billionaire Lucas Everhart. Samantha Everhart was often described as ethereal. She possessed an elegance that seemed both otherworldly and deeply rooted in reality. Part of this allure was her upbringing. Born Samantha Fairwin, an only child to two influential philanthropists in Northern California, her parents, Gregory and Helena Fairwin, had made a modest fortune investing in sustainable energy businesses before the rest of the world caught on. As a result, Samantha grew up in a labyrinth of ivy-covered mansions, exclusive boarding schools, and summer holidays in the Amalfi Coast. Despite the privilege surrounding her, Samantha never carried herself with arrogance. From a young age, she had learned that wealth could buy silence, but not truth. It could fund beauty, but never guarantee love. Her heart had always belonged to the quiet moments: the brush of a paint stroke at a museum, the sound of waves crashing under a blood-orange sunset, the way her mother held her hand tightly during charity tours in impoverished towns. These memories, soft but grounding, shaped a woman who could move through ballrooms with grace, but never forgot to look behind her. She cultivated an appreciation for the arts, championed environmental causes, and developed a keen sense for reading people's intentions. When Samantha was 21, she met Lucas Everhart at a fundraising gala organized by her parents in San Francisco. Lucas was already forging his path in the tech world. A brilliant, ambitious young man who had developed a groundbreaking software platform. Tall, impeccably groomed, and exuding confidence, Lucas made everyone in the room feel like the center of his attention. His eyes sparkled whenever he talked about his future plans, and the intensity of his vision sparked something in Samantha. That night, they danced beneath glittering chandeliers, shared laughter over mini foie gras canapés, and found themselves deep in conversation until well past midnight. It wasn't just the words he used that drew her in. It was the way he looked at her, like she was a mystery he wanted to spend his whole life unraveling. She remembered the sensation vividly: the warmth of his hand at her back as they glided across the ballroom, the rare vulnerability in his laugh when she teased him about his terrible French pronunciation. Something about that night felt like destiny unfolding beneath their feet. Their courtship blossomed quickly. Samantha's parents recognized Lucas's potential and admired his perseverance. Some whispered that Lucas came from a modest background, raised by a single mother in a cramped Oakland apartment, always scraping by. But that only fueled his ambition. He didn't want to merely succeed. He wanted to transform entire industries. Not long after their first meeting, Lucas's startup, Novacore, landed a series of monumental deals. Venture capital poured in, catapulting him from an entrepreneurial whiz-kid to a wonderkind in the eyes of influential financiers. Names like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett were whispered around him, praising his innovative spirit. Through every milestone, Samantha stood beside him, not just as a partner, but as a believer. She stayed up through countless pitch rehearsals, whispered encouragements before shareholder meetings, and held his hand through the chaos of early fame. She thought they were building something unshakable. And maybe they were, until the foundation began to shift beneath her feet. Within 2 years, Samantha and Lucas were married in a lavish ceremony at the Fairwin estate. Roses from a prestigious British supplier decorated the garden. The bride wore a custom gown by a revered French designer, and the who's who of high society, including Oprah Winfrey and philanthropic icon Melinda Gates, attended. It was an event covered by the nation's top magazines, each hailing the couple as a new power duo in technology and philanthropy. But beneath the glitz and glamour, the marriage carried a darker undercurrent. Lucas's charm was undeniable, yet so was his burning desire for success and recognition. an insatiable thirst that pushed him to work 15-hour days, travel relentlessly, and embrace risk-taking in all forms. He confided to Samantha early on that he wanted to be the biggest name in tech, overshadowing anyone who came before him. At first, Samantha admired this unstoppable ambition. She believed it would pave the way for philanthropic endeavors. They both dreamed of supporting everything from global educational programs to sweeping environmental reforms. As Lucas's star rose, so did the fortress they built around themselves. Their combined net worth soared to the billions, and with that came an entourage of advisors, staff, bodyguards, and sycophants. It became difficult to distinguish genuine friendships from calculated alliances built on Lucas's influence. Yet in those early years of marriage, Samantha and Lucas remained close. At least during the fleeting moments Lucas wasn't traveling for work. The Everhart estate, nestled in the heart of a private enclave in Marin County, became a glass castle designed by a renowned architect. The structure was a mesmerizing blend of modern glass facades and classical stone pillars. It was an architectural masterpiece, frequently featured in lifestyle magazines. From the outside, people saw an impenetrable fortress of wealth and style. But Samantha knew it as a place where she often roamed alone. Every hallway gleamed, every room was curated to perfection, but the silence between the walls echoed louder than any applause they ever received. At night, she would sit in the solarium with a cup of tea, staring through the transparent ceiling at a moonlit sky, wondering how a home so grand could feel so hollow. When Lucas was away, she filled her days with philanthropic projects, connecting local schools with arts programs, hosting lavish dinners for climate change initiatives, and championing mental health awareness. She became a beloved figure in charitable circles. Her warmth, intelligence, and willingness to collaborate endeared her to many. Yet something was missing. That absence was not just Lucas's body, it was his presence, his soul. The quiet space where laughter once lived and gentle touches once lingered. Samantha would sometimes reach for her phone, fingers hovering over his contact, only to stop. What would she say? That she missed him? That she felt invisible in their glass empire? Lucas's ambition had transformed from unstoppable to corrosive. He spent more nights in California's Silicon Valley than jetted off to Europe to secure new deals. The fleeting romantic dinners they once shared turned into email updates or hurried phone calls. Even when Lucas was physically present, his mind was usually tethered to the next big pitch or investor meeting. Samantha found herself living in a perpetual state of longing. She tried to communicate this, but Lucas, ever the problem solver, interpreted her concerns as just another issue to be checked off a list, rather than a cry for emotional intimacy. Each conversation left her feeling smaller, like a whisper in the wind of his ambition. She didn't want a solution. She wanted him to be heard, to be held, to be remembered not as a fixture of his success, but as the woman he once couldn't look away from. As time passed, subtle changes began to erode Samantha's belief in their union. She caught glimpses of disconcerting behavior, moments where Lucas would discreetly lower his voice to take calls, or when a dinner with colleagues suddenly seemed to include a few too many female associates. Yet for many years, the fear that something nefarious was happening remained an unspoken, nagging anxiety at the back of her mind. After all, Lucas was not just her husband. He was the father of their 2 children, Mason and Eliza, and the media loved him. He was the visionary, a business mogul who gave compelling speeches at global conferences, proclaiming how the future of tech could save the planet. But every perfect facade eventually cracks. Summer arrived in Marin County with warm breezes and a hint of blossoming jasmine drifting through the air. Samantha was preparing the family for a vacation to Lake Vera, a tradition she and Lucas had started a few years back as a way to reconnect. She felt a spark of hope that this trip could bring them closer. However, Lucas's schedule had shifted at the last minute. He claimed a critical meeting with a new investor from Milan had come up, so he would fly separately and meet them there. In the past, Samantha might have accepted such a change with minimal suspicion. But now a nagging voice in her head questioned every deviation from the plan. And in that voice was something else, something she hated admitting. Doubt not just about Lucas, but about herself. Was she no longer enough? Had the years, the children, the routine dimmed the version of Samantha that Lucas once adored? It was a thought that slithered beneath her confidence like a hairline fracture in a mirror, invisible to most, but impossible for her to unsee. That voice grew stronger when Samantha stumbled upon Lucas's phone buzzing unattended in his study. The device was usually locked behind biometric security, but at that moment it was open, displaying a message from an unfamiliar sender. "Missing you. Can't wait to see you again." Her heart hammered as she read the words. She had no proof of who A might be, but it was enough to raise goosebumps on her arms. A sense of dread twisted her stomach inside out. She placed the phone down as if it were on fire and stepped away, adrenaline surging through her veins. Over the following days, she noticed additional signs. Lucas would disappear for hours when they were supposed to be working from home together. Or he'd receive a message in the middle of a conversation and abruptly change the subject, growing distant. Samantha, torn between confronting him outright and preserving the fragile sense of normalcy that remained, began feeling like an intruder in her own marriage. There were nights she stared at herself in the mirror, wondering where the vibrant woman she used to be had gone. She still looked the part, graceful, composed, but inside, she felt like she was aging in invisible ways. She hated that she questioned her worth based on his actions, but the insecurity seeped in all the same, subtle and corrosive. One evening, while hosting a charity dinner, Samantha exchanged glances with a longtime friend, Evelyn Marcus, who was aware of the toll Lucas's absence was taking on her. Evelyn shot her a sympathetic look from across the table as Lucas regaled other guests with stories of his latest business triumphs. To the untrained ear, everything he said sounded glorious and groundbreaking, but Samantha could detect a hollow ring to his words. The Lucas she fell in love with had once prioritized deep human connection. The man who now sat across from her felt more like a charismatic hologram performing for an audience. After the dinner, Evelyn approached Samantha in the large foyer lit by overhead chandeliers. "You look so exhausted," Evelyn said gently, placing a hand on Samantha's arm. "Maybe it's time you step away from all this. Even briefly, you deserve a break." Samantha managed a polite smile. "Thank you for caring. Really. I just need some fresh air," she added before Evelyn could protest. Samantha excused herself and slipped out into the garden under the moonlight. The air was cooler, and the scent of night-blooming jasmine helped soothe her nerves. 1,000 conflicting thoughts raced through her mind. Could she be misunderstanding the messages on Lucas's phone? Could A be an investor or a colleague using a flirtatious tone? Samantha clung to every thin possibility, desperate to convince herself that her suspicion was just a manifestation of loneliness. But Samantha was no fool. She could recognize the difference between corporate formality and intimate secrecy. Despite her misgivings, she continued forward, half in denial. She wasn't ready to accept betrayal, because to do so would mean facing a crumbling reality she had invested her life in. It would mean dismantling the very image of success and stability she had helped Lucas build. It would mean looking her children in the eyes and explaining why their father wasn't coming home the same man anymore. Then everything changed. 2 weeks later, Samantha received an anonymous email. It read, "Lucas has been seeing someone else for months. Check his itinerary for his business trip to Milan." A friend attached was a single photograph. Lucas stepping out of a luxury car in California, his arm around a slender blonde woman in her late 20s. The look on Lucas's face was not platonic. Her fingers trembled as she zoomed into the image. There was something unmistakably intimate in the way he leaned toward the woman, something too familiar in the half-smile on his face. A smile she once believed was reserved for her. Samantha felt a vice tighten around her heart as she examined the photo again and again. Her first reaction was to confront him immediately. But Lucas was away, coincidentally, or perhaps not, on another business trip. She tried his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She considered calling his assistant, Danielle, but realized she wanted answers from Lucas himself, not some carefully staged explanation. Anguish roiled in her stomach, but a quiet part of her mind urged restraint. She needed to be certain, needed more than just a photograph and an anonymous email. The next few days turned Samantha into a detective of sorts. She discreetly interviewed Lucas's driver, a loyal employee who had been with the family for years. He confirmed that Lucas had made several unplanned detours to an upscale townhouse in San Francisco. Each time, he insisted the driver wait around the corner to avoid detection. Samantha listened without interrupting, her jaw clenched so tightly she thought she might crack a molar. She nodded, thanked him softly, then went to her study and closed the door. Alone, she wept. Not just from betrayal, but from the shame of ever doubting her own instincts. Samantha also found a receipt from a boutique hotel in Los Angeles, a place Lucas once claimed he detested for its lack of privacy. Yet the receipt was for a romantic suite, complete with champagne and an in-room spa service. Slowly, every suspicion sharpened into reality. It wasn't just the betrayal that shook Samantha. It was the betrayal by the man who had promised her a lifetime partnership built on trust and honesty. The father of her children. The philanthropic visionary who told the world about ethical leadership and moral integrity. She felt livid and humiliated, but above all, she felt heartbreak on a scale she had never imagined. What Samantha didn't expect was how quickly events would spiral out of her control. Determined to confront Lucas privately, she waited until he was due to return from another crucial meeting, this time in London. She planned to have him meet her at the Everhart estate for a quiet discussion before the annual Everhart family reunion, a grand affair that brought the extended family together for a weekend every year. Lucas's parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and even second cousins gathered from all over the globe at the estate. They would hold barbecues, philanthropic auctions, and heartfelt toasts about unity and legacy. However, Lucas's flight got in late, and by the time he arrived at the estate, the entire clan was already present. The mansion teemed with laughter, clinking glasses, and excited chatter reverberating through the halls. Lucas walked in wearing a sharp navy suit, carrying an air of exhausted triumph. He greeted various relatives, while Samantha stood at the foot of the sweeping staircase, her heart pounding with anticipation. She was still deciding whether to drag him aside immediately or wait until the festivities concluded. But fate had other plans. As if orchestrated by some cosmic design, Lucas's phone slipped out of his pocket while hugging his mother, landing face down on the marble floor. An audible gasp echoed through the foyer. One of the teenage cousins picked it up and handed it back to him, but not before the screen lit up with a text from Alyssa, the same name Samantha had seen in multiple clues. "You did great, babe. Can't wait to see you next week." Lucas fumbled with the phone, cheeks flushing. He tried to dismiss it with a forced laugh, but eyes from various corners of the foyer lingered on the exchange. Some relatives looked puzzled. Others politely averted their gaze. Only Samantha noticed that beneath Lucas's polished exterior, panic flickered in his eyes. He excused himself to slip into his study, presumably to compose himself. Samantha followed, her anger fueling her steps. Once inside, she shut the heavy mahogany door behind her. The study was lined with bookshelves containing rare first editions, many of them gifts from philanthropic friends. Lucas faced her, a tense expression across his face. "What do you want me to say?" he asked finally, his voice unsteady. Samantha looked at him, sadness and fury twisting in her chest. "I want you to tell me the truth. Who is she?" He swallowed hard, glancing at the door as if to ensure they were alone. Then, as if some dam had broken, he began talking, denying nothing and explaining everything. "Her name is Alyssa Madison," he said, "a financial consultant who got entangled with me after a series of late-night meetings." Lucas insisted it had started innocently, that she was just a bright mind who aided him in expanding Novacore's global reach. Then the lines blurred. He said stress, ambition, and the glamour of success all converged into a toxic mixture. Before he knew it, he had crossed moral boundaries. Though Samantha could see Lucas trembling, she found little room for empathy. His confession didn't heal the wounds, it poured salt on them. Every new detail felt like a betrayal 10 times over. She tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy, as if the very walls of the room pressed in on her. Some part of her had known, or feared, or suspected. But hearing it spoken aloud ripped away her last defenses. Her thoughts spun. Was it her fault for being too predictable? Too wrapped up in the children? Had she become invisible to him? She had imagined infidelity in dark, quiet hours, but reality was sharper than any nightmare. Each word he spoke landed like a stone thrown at stained glass, shattering illusions she had fought to keep intact. She watched the man she once trusted turn into a stranger before her very eyes. And for the first time she saw just how far he had drifted from the promises they once whispered in the quiet. Yet she forced herself to stand tall and maintain composure, if only for a moment. The annual family dinner was about to commence in the grand hall. Waitstaff bustled around, setting up elaborately decorated long tables, shining silver cutlery, and ensuring vintage wines were at the perfect temperature. Outside, children ran and played under the watchful eyes of nannies. Uncles and cousins gathered on the terrace, engaged in lively debate over business, sports, and philanthropic projects. Ordinarily, Samantha would have been the gracious hostess. This time, she felt like an actress in a tragedy about to reach its climax. She walked among the guests like a ghost wearing velvet, every smile, every polite nod, a silent scream buried beneath poise. The scent of heirloom roses mixed with the metallic taste of anxiety at the back of her throat. Her hands, though steady at her sides, felt like they were gripping shards of memory. She longed to run, to escape this mansion, these people, this night. But she knew that would only leave the lie intact. And more than anything, she needed to reclaim her voice. Not for revenge, not for spectacle, but for truth. Instead of stalling, Samantha decided to confront Lucas publicly. It was not an act of revenge, but a need for the truth to surface. She had spent months grappling with loneliness, heartbreak, and suspicion. To continue with pleasantries would break her spirit irreparably. She reasoned that Lucas's affair was not just a personal betrayal, but also a lie lived among the very relatives who adored him. So, as the family gathered for dinner, Samantha quietly signaled the head butler to hold the first course. She tapped her crystal wine glass with a spoon, a gentle chime that swiftly captured everyone's attention. Conversations ceased and heads turned toward her. Lucas shot her a fearful look from across the room. Samantha's pulse raced, but outwardly she appeared calm, regal. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying the quiet authority of a person who has never needed to raise her tone to be heard. "I know you all flew in from different corners of the world to be here tonight. I'm grateful for your presence more than you know." Murmurs of approval and curiosity rippled through the crowd. Lucas's father, Edward Everhart, observed her intently, and his mother, Margaret, looked perplexed but intrigued. The younger cousins grew silent, sensing something bigger was afoot. Samantha continued, "This evening was meant to be a celebration of family unity and the collective memories that bind us together. Unfortunately, there's something heavy on my heart that I can't keep hidden any longer." Samantha paused, taking a measured breath. "Lucas and I, well, let's just say our marriage is not the perfect picture you might imagine. In fact, I've decided I'm leaving him." A stunned silence dropped over the room. Gasps, whispers, and the clatter of silverware rang out like a discordant symphony. Lucas stiffened, his knuckles whitening around the back of his chair. He opened his mouth to speak, but Samantha raised a hand to signal she was not yet finished. "I make this announcement with the deepest regret, but also with honesty. Lucas has strayed." Her voice grew uneven, though she summoned every ounce of grace to keep her emotions in check. "I can't, in good conscience, remain silent and pretend otherwise. This is my choice, and I believe it's the right one." The weight of the truth, once held behind quiet smiles and forced laughter, now unfurled itself across the room like thunder following lightning. Samantha's heart raced, not from fear, but from the ache of finally letting go. Her hands trembled slightly at her sides, but her gaze did not falter. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it gently and stared at the sea of shocked faces. Distant cousins, uncles, aunts, Lucas's parents, and my own 2 children, who looked on from the far side of the table in confusion and fear. Samantha's heart broke for them, but she pressed on. "I need you all to understand," she said, her voice choking slightly, "that I've tried for years to hold on to the family we built together through Lucas's successes and struggles. But there's only so much deception a heart can endure. I'm sorry if this ruins your evening." Her throat tightened with grief for the life she once fought for, the life she was now releasing into memory. She could feel the burn of every unspoken plea, every unanswered message, every lonely night when she lay awake listening to the hollow sound of her husband's absence. Lucas's voice cut through the air, shaky yet forceful. "Samantha, please, we can talk about this privately. There's no need to do it here in front of everyone." A single ripple of tension passed through the crowd. Samantha stood taller, her eyes brimming with heartbreak, yet unwavering in her resolution. "I begged you to talk privately, Lucas. For months I reached out, hoping you'd open up about what was happening between us. You shut me out, so now I'm done knocking on a door that won't open." Her words didn't carry anger. They carried resignation. The kind that comes after endless tries, after hope has withered into silence. The crowd wasn't just witnessing a marital breakdown. They were witnessing a woman reclaiming the last pieces of herself. A murmur of shock and sympathy spread through the hall. Lucas's father, Edward Everhart, rubbed his temple in disbelief. His mother, Margaret, placed a trembling hand over her mouth. Lucas's siblings exchanged stunned glances. Evelyn Marcus, who had joined as a friend of the family, stood near the back with tears welling in her eyes. It was a moment that would forever divide the before and after of Samantha's life in a single, decisive act. She had shattered the veil of illusions that draped their public image. Lucas looked like a man who had been cornered by the consequences of his own actions. His complexion pale, his once confident posture faltering. In the immediate aftermath, the grand hall resembled a chamber of echoes. A flurry of overlapping reactions rippled among the guests. Some relatives rushed to Samantha, arms extended, offering comfort. Others swarmed Lucas, demanding an explanation. The staff stood awkwardly to the side, unsure whether to continue serving or retreat from the emotional battlefield. Samantha, feeling dizzy from adrenaline, managed a nod to the head butler, who silently understood. It was best to serve dinner in smaller, separate settings. For anyone still wishing to eat, the large family meal they had planned would not be happening. She turned, searching for her children, Mason and Eliza. They had been playing in the adjacent hallway moments before her announcement, but now she saw them at the hall's entrance, eyes wide with fear. "Mom?" Mason ventured, stepping forward. The 12-year-old was tall for his age, and his eyes flicked back and forth between Samantha and Lucas. Eliza, only 8, clung to Mason's arm, looking on the verge of tears. Samantha knelt down to their level, ignoring the swirl of grown-up chaos behind her. "Sweethearts," she said softly, "I'm so sorry you had to hear that. Your father and I, we love you very much. That will never change." She opened her arms, and they both leaned into her embrace, confusion etched in their small faces. Lucas walked over, face stricken. He tried to reach out to them, but Mason instinctively tensed, and Eliza shifted closer to Samantha. Lucas's expression crumpled at the sight, but he drew back, as if aware he was the cause of their fear. From a few feet away, Lucas's mother Margaret watched the heartbreaking scene, tears glistening in her eyes. She hovered near them, wanting to help, but uncertain how. Eventually she stepped forward and gently patted Samantha's shoulder. "My dear, is there anything I can do?" Samantha looked up, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sorrow and determination. "Right now I just need some space. I'm sorry, I know this is difficult for you too." Margaret nodded, swallowing her own pain. It was a complicated moment for her. She loved her son unconditionally, but she had also grown to admire and cherish Samantha as the daughter she never had. In another corner, Edward Everhart had cornered Lucas. His voice was low and urgent. Edward was a commanding presence, a retired CEO who had never shied away from making his opinions known. From his stern expression, it was clear that the conversation was anything but pleasant. Later that evening, once most of the family had dispersed to different wings of the mansion or retreated to nearby hotels, Samantha found herself in the quietude of the mansion's small private library. It was one of her favorite rooms. Dark cherry wood shelves lined with literature from all eras, a plush reading chair near an ornate fireplace, and a wide window that overlooked the sprawling grounds. She sank into the chair, exhausted and heartbroken. Memories swept over her like a tidal wave. She recalled the early days of her relationship with Lucas, how he would speak passionately about bridging global communities through technology, how they volunteered at soup kitchens together when Novacor was in its infancy, how they once spent a spontaneous night dancing in Golden Gate Park to a random street violinist, just because it felt magical. In one memory, she saw herself after she had lost a dear college friend to an unexpected illness. She had been inconsolable. But Lucas had arrived at her door with takeout from her favorite Thai place, a homemade CD of soothing piano music, and arms ready to hold her through her grief. They used to communicate so effortlessly, as if their souls were in constant conversation. When had that changed? She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but it was likely when Lucas's star soared too close to the sun. And what haunted her most was the quiet suspicion that she had seen the cracks long ago, but chose not to speak. There had been moments when she considered counseling, even separation, but always dismissed them, telling herself it was just a phase, that they would bounce back, like they always had. She told herself she was being dramatic, overly sensitive, too emotional. Their philanthropic projects were meant to keep them bonded. They had co-founded the Everhart Fairwin initiative to support underprivileged youth in developing nations, even traveling to remote villages in Africa and Southeast Asia. Photographs of those trips, capturing their sweaty smiles and hopeful hearts, adorned the library walls. Yet as Lucas's empire grew, so did the demands on his time and attention. The simplest sign that something was off had been his emotional unavailability. He no longer asked about Samantha's day or her goals. Everything became overshadowed by talk of IPOs, acquisitions, and product launches. She had clung to the image of their former selves like a woman gripping a lifeboat, even when the waves of reality began to crash. There were nights she cried silently in bed while he snored beside her, and she told herself it was temporary, that if she were just more patient, more understanding, it would pass. But it hadn't. Rubbing her temples, Samantha felt a surge of tears. She had been holding back all day. She had tried so hard to maintain the marriage, especially for the children. But the moment she discovered indisputable evidence of Lucas's affair, it became clear she had been the only one fighting to preserve it. Down the hall, in a smaller guest suite, Lucas paced back and forth. His tie was undone, and his suit jacket lay crumpled on a chair. He looked like a man who had just glimpsed the enormity of what he stood to lose. Hours ago, he was the billionaire tech magnate who could dazzle a room with his charm. Now, the family he claimed to cherish stood on the brink of collapse because of his recklessness. He stared at the message notifications on his phone from Alyssa. Guilt needled him. More messages arrived, some supportive, others demanding to know why he wasn't responding. He tossed the device onto the bed, unwilling to face the proof of his infidelity. His father's words still echoed in his mind. "You're a fool, Lucas. Your mother and I raised you to value loyalty and family. I didn't build a legacy for you to tarnish it this way." Lucas had tried to defend himself, but every excuse crumbled under the weight of his own guilt. He realized how fragile his meticulously curated public image truly was. More importantly, he realized how gravely he had wounded Samantha, a woman he once believed to be his perfect partner, who had supported him more than anyone else ever had. A quiet knock sounded at the door. He opened it to find his sister, Julia Everhart, one of the few people in the family who always spoke her mind. She was 3 years older, with the same dark hair and commanding presence as Lucas, though she had chosen a more private path, working as a clinical psychologist. She stepped into the room, crossing her arms. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice filled with a disappointed edge that stung worse than any insult. Lucas sank onto the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. "I don't know. I messed up. Badly." Julia stood in front of him. "This isn't just some minor mess-up. You betrayed Samantha in the worst way possible, and now you're risking losing your children's respect. Are you really willing to go through with a divorce?" Lucas looked up, desperation gleaming in his eyes. "No, I don't want to lose her. I never wanted this to get so out of control. I'm an idiot. Alyssa was a mistake that I let go on too long. He trailed off, breath hitching in his throat. Julia's features softened. She took a seat beside her brother, her hand resting lightly on his back. "It's time to figure out what matters most, Luck. You're brilliant at making deals, forging global partnerships, but you've forgotten how to nurture the one partnership that should matter more than any business deal: your marriage." Tears gathered in Lucas's eyes. Julia had never seen him cry before, and the sight of it broke her heart. This was a man who had scaled the highest peaks of success, only to find himself shattered by his own selfish choices. "What can I do?" he asked, as though searching for an immediate solution. Julia sighed. "Talk to Samantha, and I mean really talk to her. Apologize, but don't expect instant forgiveness. You need to prove through actions, not words, that you're willing to change. And if she still wants a divorce, you respect that choice." He nodded, swallowing hard. It was a bitter pill to consider that he might not have a chance to fix what he had broken, but he resolved to try. The following morning, tension still blanketed the mansion. Half of the extended family had decided to leave early, not wanting to be embroiled in the drama. Others lingered, hoping to support Samantha or Lucas in some way. Mason and Eliza were whisked away to a nearby cousin's house to shield them from the continuing turmoil, leaving the mansion eerily quiet. In a move that surprised no one, Alyssa attempted to contact Lucas repeatedly, demanding to know what was going on. Lucas ignored her calls. He had no idea how to face her, or whether he had any intention of continuing their relationship. Truthfully, he knew the answer deep down. Alyssa was not who he wanted to spend his life with. She had been a diversion, a destructive, selfish choice that now threatened to dismantle everything he held dear. The silence in the house was deafening. Lucas wandered its corridors like a man lost in his own empire, haunted by memories embedded in every corner. Eliza's laughter echoing from the grand staircase, Mason's favorite blanket left on the armchair in the study, Samantha's favorite classical piano pieces lingering like ghosts from the speakers in the lounge. Every sound that once brought comfort now stabbed at him with unbearable regret. Around midday, Lucas finally mustered the courage to knock on Samantha's bedroom door. She had moved into a separate suite the night before, a clear sign of her intent to distance herself. He heard her voice granting permission to enter. Heart pounding, he stepped inside. Samantha stood by the window, wearing a simple white blouse and casual trousers. She had the bearing of someone who hadn't slept. Her eyes were rimmed with red, and her face pale. Yet she maintained a quiet dignity that reminded Lucas of the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "I'm sorry," he began, voice trembling. The gravity of those words hung in the air, echoing off the pristine walls. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need you to know. I'm sorry. For lying, for betraying you, for all the pain I've caused." Samantha remained still, her gaze fixed on the sprawling estate outside. "You should have thought about that before," she replied, her voice hollow. "I'm beyond apologies right now. I just want to plan how we're going to move forward, for the children's sake." Her words were steady, but behind them was a fortress barely standing. Her chest rose and fell in slow, controlled breaths, the kind you take when your heart is breaking but your pride won't let you show it. She refused to cry in front of him, not again, not after all the nights she wept alone while he was off living a lie. Lucas's breath hitched. "I deserve that. But before we talk about anything else, I need you to know, my affair with Alyssa, it's over." Samantha turned to face him, tears glittering in her eyes. "Over because you got caught, or over because you realized it was wrong?" The question cut him deeply. There was no accusation in her voice, just exhaustion. And that, somehow, made it worse. He had hoped for rage, even hatred. But indifference? That terrified him. He saw in her eyes not just pain, but the slow erosion of love into something colder, quieter, something final. Lucas closed his eyes, guilt twisting in his chest. "I was selfish and stupid. I let myself get swept up in the thrill of it, the excitement, the attention. Maybe it was a midlife crisis or whatever you want to call it. But it was wrong. And now, seeing everything I risked losing, I understand how worthless it was compared to our family." Samantha let out a trembling breath. "I used to believe you could never do something like this." "I guess I was naive," Samantha said quietly. "Or maybe just blinded by love." She paused, her eyes searching his face. "I'm filing for divorce. I need you to understand that." Lucas's tears finally spilled over. He fell silent for a moment, shoulders slumped as though the weight of the entire world pressed upon him. "I understand," he whispered. "If that's truly what you want, I won't fight you, but I need you to know, I'll do anything for a second chance." She looked away, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. she admitted. All these years, I believed in your integrity, your sense of right and wrong. And to know you could do this, to carry on lies for months, it's too much for me. Lucas nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I'll respect your decision. Whatever you decide, I'll cooperate. But please, Samantha, if there's even the slightest chance you might forgive me one day, I promise I'll work tirelessly to prove I deserve it. Samantha's face betrayed a flicker of compassion, a spark of the lingering love she still felt despite everything. But her resolve was firm. You need to leave, she said quietly. I want some time alone to think. The children will be back later, and I'll need to figure out how to explain all of this to them. Without further protest, Lucas left. He knew any attempts at emotional manipulation now would only deepen her mistrust. And although every fiber of his being wanted to hold her, to beg her not to finalize the divorce, he realized the irony of the situation. The dynamic entrepreneur who always found solutions and overcame obstacles was now powerless to fix what he had so heedlessly broken. Before Lucas could even begin to piece together his next move, an unexpected visitor arrived at the gates of the Everhart estate. Alyssa Madison. Dressed in a crisp black blazer and matching skirt, she looked every bit the polished financial consultant, despite the commotion at the mansion. The security team recognized her from previous visits with Lucas and let her through, albeit reluctantly. She made her way to the main entrance, ignoring the uncomfortable glances from the household staff. Word had spread like wildfire among them. They knew who she was and why she was here. Alyssa, however, seemed determined. Her chin set defiantly as she stepped into the foyer. She spotted Lucas descending the grand staircase. A swirl of emotions crossed his features. Shock, anger, guilt. He approached her, voice low. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, Alyssa said, her tone cold and clipped. You haven't been answering my calls. I heard what happened last night. The entire family knows, don't they? Alyssa exhaled sharply. I didn't sign up for this level of drama. Lucas's eyes blazed. Drama? You think this is just drama? My entire family is in turmoil because of us. Alyssa folded her arms. You mean because of your wife's overreaction? She made a scene in front of everyone. Lucas's jaw tightened. He felt a sudden surge of protectiveness for Samantha. Don't blame this on her. She has every right to be furious. We deceived her. Alyssa sneered. You're making me sound like the villain. You told me you were unhappy, that Samantha never understood your vision anymore, that the marriage was practically dead already. Guilt stabbed at Lucas. Yes, he had said those things, in moments of weakness, looking for sympathy or validation. Now those words felt like knives in his own back. Regardless of what I said in private, he replied, the reality is, I made a commitment to her, and I broke it. He met her eyes. Alyssa, this is over. I can't continue this. She shook her head, disbelief and anger twisting her features. So that's it? You trash your marriage and then you decide you don't want me either? Lucas sighed, a wave of exhaustion sweeping over him. I'm sorry. I never should have let this happen in the first place. Alyssa's eyes flashed. You can't just ghost me and expect me to vanish? Do you realize how much I've invested in our relationship, professionally and personally? He pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a migraine coming on. I'll make sure your professional standing isn't compromised. If you need references, or if there's a position at Novacor. She cut him off, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, how generous. Thanks for the job offer, Luck. But I didn't come here to negotiate a career move. You and I had something real, and you can't just toss me aside now that it's inconvenient. Lucas inhaled deeply. I'm not tossing you aside. I'm doing the only thing I can do, ending a relationship that was built on lies. The tension in the air was suffocating. Alyssa stared at him, her fury mingling with hurt. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of tears. Then her expression hardened. Fine, if that's how you want to play it. But don't expect me to keep quiet if Samantha decides to go public with this scandal. Don't forget, Lucas, I know plenty about your business dealings. The threat was clear, and it terrified Lucas on multiple levels. Not because he had shady dealings. He prided himself on legitimate, though aggressive, business strategies. But a public scandal could further devastate Samantha and the children. Before Lucas could respond, Samantha herself emerged into the foyer. She had heard the voices raised in argument from the adjacent corridor. Her gaze flicked between Lucas and Alyssa, her face momentarily slack with shock at the unexpected confrontation. Then she gathered herself, standing tall. "You must be Alyssa," Samantha said, her tone icy but controlled. "I suggest you leave. This is neither the time nor the place." Alyssa looked Samantha up and down. For a heartbeat, neither spoke, and Lucas could feel the pulse of tension like electricity in the air. Alyssa opened her mouth as if to retort, but perhaps sensing Samantha's unshakable resolve, she exhaled sharply, turned on her heel, and strode out. The silence that followed was heavier than the confrontation itself. Samantha's fingers curled slightly at her sides, though her face remained composed. Lucas watched the determination in her spine, the unspoken exhaustion behind her poise, and realized how much damage he had done, not just to their relationship, but to her peace. Lucas considered following her to prevent further conflict, but a single glance at Samantha's stricken face anchored him in place. They stood in silence until the echo of Alyssa's heels on the marble floor faded completely. Then Samantha closed her eyes, as if summoning the last remnants of her composure. "Do me a favor," she said softly, meeting Lucas's gaze. "Pack your things and leave. I need this house to myself for a while. I need to think without you here." He opened his mouth to object, to offer to stay in a separate wing, but the resolute grief in her eyes silenced him. "All right," he said quietly, "I'll go. But please, if you need anything." She simply shook her head and retreated down the hall. Lucas didn't follow. He couldn't. The sight of her retreating, shoulders squared, head held high, even as pain etched every line of her posture, was enough to keep him rooted where he stood. It was the walk of a woman who had finally chosen herself. Lucas watched her vanish into the shadows of the mansion, realizing it might be the last time he'd see her living under the same roof. Over the next few weeks, life became a whirlwind of legal consultations, custody arrangements, and painful public scrutiny. The press caught wind of Lucas's affair and Samantha's dramatic announcement. Though details were scarce, Samantha had refused to feed the gossip. Photographers camped outside law firms, hoping to catch a glimpse of either party. Society columnists spun sensational stories, some fueling speculation that Samantha was seeking an enormous settlement, while others labeled Lucas a typical billionaire philanderer. Each headline felt like another cut, reminders of a private collapse laid bare for the world. Lucas tried to shield the children from the chaos, but he knew the damage was already done. He saw it in Mason's silence, in Eliza's tentative glances. Lucas temporarily moved to a penthouse suite in Manhattan, drowning himself in work while simultaneously trying to reach out to Samantha through any means possible. He sent her heartfelt letters, apologizing for the pain he caused and promising to atone. He quietly arranged to funnel additional funding into the Everhart Fairchild Initiative, hoping to show he was still committed to their shared dream of philanthropy. But each gesture was met with silence. Samantha, on the other hand, was drowning in her own turmoil. She had hired a reputable divorce attorney to represent her interests and protect her children's futures. Every day was an emotional roller coaster. One moment, Samantha was resolute in her decision. The next, she was haunted by memories of the man she still loved, the father of her children, the partner she had envisioned growing old with. Was there a space for reconciliation? Could she trust him not to stray again? Her parents tried to offer guidance, reminding her of her own strength and worth. Simone Kaufman, her closest friend, was there daily, lending an ear or a shoulder to cry on. One afternoon, over cups of peppermint tea in Samantha's lounge, Simone posed a question that struck her deeply. "When you think of your future, do you feel a spark of hope? Hope that maybe, just maybe, Lucas can still be part of it? Or does it feel too painful to imagine?" Samantha sighed, staring at the swirling liquid in her teacup. "I don't know. I'm angry, hurt, and yet there's a part of me that wonders if I'm losing not just a marriage, but a partner who, despite his mistakes, once cared for me in ways no one else ever has." What she didn't say aloud, what she hadn't even admitted to Simone, was that there had been a night, just after discovering the affair, when she almost walked away without telling anyone. She had packed a small overnight bag, stood at the threshold of the guest house, and seriously considered leaving everything behind. No confrontation, no scandal, just silence. disappear to her parents' vineyard in Napa, vanish from the headlines and the pitying eyes. It was the children's sleeping faces that stopped her. That, and the tiny flicker of rage, against the idea of letting Lucas escape consequence, letting him explain her absence in whatever narrative suited him. Simone nodded, empathizing. That's what healing is for. You don't have to decide your entire future right now. Take the time to grieve, to recover. If Lucas is truly remorseful, he'll give you the space you need. In parallel, Lucas was grappling with his own introspection. During one late-night walk through Central Park, where he and Samantha once danced to a street violinist, he broke down in tears. The memory of that magical night felt like it belonged to another world. Filled with regret, he considered going into therapy, acknowledging for the first time that he might have an unquenchable drive for validation that led him astray. If he wanted any chance of salvaging his family, he needed to confront his demons. A few days later, Lucas arranged a private meeting with Samantha's attorney. He wanted to ensure that the property division and custody arrangements were handled respectfully. He insisted on equal joint custody of the children, if Samantha was open to it, promising that he would do nothing to make the process acrimonious. He even considered stepping back from his role as CEO of Novacor to prioritize his family. The tech world might see it as a stunning move, Lucas Everhart relinquishing his power seat, but to him, it seemed like a necessary sacrifice to demonstrate how serious he was about making amends. This newfound humility gradually reached Samantha's ears, mostly through her attorney. Though still guarded, she could not deny that Lucas's actions indicated genuine remorse. Perhaps she thought he was finally seeing beyond the allure of success and status. She decided it would be beneficial for the children to see their father, and that she could not let her bitterness overshadow their bond. So, she agreed to an afternoon meeting with Lucas at a public park where Jasper and Natalie could play. The meeting was awkward at first. Lucas arrived early, dressed in casual clothes, a departure from his usual tailored suits. He held a bouquet of sunflowers, Samantha's favorites, and greeted his kids with visible nervousness. Jasper was hesitant, standing stiffly as Lucas tried to hug him, but Natalie ran into his arms, burying her face in his shoulder as if forgetting, momentarily, the tumult of the past weeks. Samantha observed from a slight distance, her heart twinging at the sight. Lucas caught her gaze and approached with the flowers, offering them tentatively. "Thank you for letting me see them," he said softly. "They mean everything to me. And so do you, Samantha." She accepted the bouquet, biting her lip. "I'm doing this for them," she replied, her voice uneven. "They miss you." Lucas nodded. "I miss them, and you, more than I can say. I know words mean little right now, but I'm working to become the man you once believed I was." They spoke a bit more while Jasper and Natalie played on the swings, forging the first step on a fragile new path. That evening, Samantha found herself rethinking everything. Sometimes, divorces are straightforward, a final break from an irreparable bond. Other times, they become the impetus for deep personal change. Could Lucas change enough to mend what he'd broken, or was it already too late? In the months that followed, Lucas continued attending therapy sessions. He stepped back from the daily operations of Novacor and made every effort to show Samantha he was sincere about prioritizing their family. Meanwhile, Samantha processed her grief, sought counseling, and focused on her philanthropic endeavors. More than ever before, the divorce proceedings advanced, albeit slowly. Samantha's attorney made sure every aspect of child support and asset division was fair. But a subtle shift occurred when Samantha agreed to meet Lucas for a family therapy session. Against all odds, old wounds began to heal, cautiously but steadily. She saw Lucas in a new light, flawed, remorseful, and genuinely working to repair the damage. The day Samantha's attorney brought the final divorce documents for her to sign, she hesitated while looking at the legal papers. She remembered how Lucas had once been her best friend, not just her husband. She recalled the laughter, the inside jokes, the silent support they offered each other in the early days of Novacor. Could that be rekindled? It was not a question of going back to the old days. Too much had changed, but perhaps they could start anew. That evening, she visited Lucas's penthouse with the signed papers in hand. He greeted her at the door, apprehension etched on his face. "I want you to know," he said softly, "that I won't hold it against you if you file these. It's my fault, and I accept the consequences." Samantha nodded, stepping inside. She glanced around. The place was stark, minimalist, lacking the warmth of a family home. "I just want to talk," she replied. They sat across from each other, the documents resting on the coffee table between them. For hours, they discussed the future. They talked about what trust truly meant, the boundaries and commitments required to rebuild it, and the necessity of time to prove genuine change. Lucas offered to continue living apart while they worked through therapy together. He didn't push for immediate reconciliation. He simply expressed a heartfelt wish to heal and eventually restore their bond, for themselves and for the children. In the end, Samantha picked up the pen, but didn't sign. Instead, she looked at Lucas with tears in her eyes, a flicker of hope daring to emerge. "I'm not ready to forgive you entirely," she admitted, "but I'm willing to give us a chance, to see if we can move forward in a healthier way. If we can't, then I'll sign them." A tear slid down Lucas's cheek. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice choked. "I promise, I'll spend the rest of my life working to be worthy of that chance." And so they began a new chapter, tentative, uncertain, but not without hope. The press eventually moved on to other scandals. The extended family stopped gossiping once they saw Lucas's genuine efforts. Life didn't suddenly revert to a picture-perfect fairy tale. It became a complex tapestry of love, betrayal, regret, and renewal. Yet through perseverance, honesty, and an unwavering desire to protect their children, Lucas and Samantha found themselves forging a path they never knew existed. One where even broken trust could be painstakingly mended, one day at a time. Would it end in true forgiveness or eventual separation? Only time would tell. But for the moment, hope was enough. So the story has come to a close, and if you're still here with me right now, then maybe, just maybe, something in this story has stirred your heart. Maybe you saw a piece of yourself in Samantha's quiet strength or Lucas's fall from grace. Maybe it reminded you of someone you've loved, or someone you've lost. Here's the truth that echoes beyond fiction. Healing is not linear. Like Samantha, we often find ourselves torn between pain and possibility, love and loss. And as the Stoics say, we suffer more in imagination than in reality, Seneca. This story shows us that confronting truth, no matter how painful, is the beginning of true freedom. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Samantha's moment of betrayal wasn't the end. It became the path to rediscovering her worth. For Lucas, hitting rock bottom wasn't a sentence. It was a turning point. So I invite you now to pause and reflect. Who or what in your life deserves a second chance? Or maybe, what part of yourself have you neglected in the name of keeping the peace? Let this story remind us that the most powerful choices often begin in silence, with the decision to show up for ourselves. Whether you're mending a relationship, walking away, or simply learning how to stand again, know that you are not alone. If this story moved you, if it made you think, feel, or remember, please like, share, and subscribe. Join us here, where every tale holds a mirror to life, and every ending is just the start of something new. Until next time, keep growing, keep healing, and above all, keep choosing you. The chandeliers of the Crystal Heights Ballroom sparkled like frozen stars, casting golden light across marble floors and velvet-draped tables. It was the night of the Bright Horizons Gala, the most prestigious charity event of the year, where business titans, celebrities, and politicians mingled under one roof. Cameras flashed, waiters carried trays of champagne, and a string quartet played softly near the stage. At the center of the spectacle stood Andrew Weston, 32, a man who relished the spotlight. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his hair slicked back with practiced precision. But what drew every gaze was the woman on his arm, Ela Monroe, a 23-year-old model with legs that seemed to stretch forever and a smile as polished as the diamonds on her wrist. Andrew had never looked more triumphant. He paraded Ela across the ballroom as if she were a prize he had won, shaking hands with old colleagues, whispering boasts into the ears of investors. "Meet my fiancée," he said repeatedly, savoring the collective gasp each time. The gossip spread like wildfire. Andrew has moved on. And look who he chose. People whispered behind champagne glasses. Some envied, others pitied. Everyone remembered Emma, The woman Andrew had divorced only months ago, the woman now carrying his child. She had vanished quietly, no longer seen at board meetings or society luncheons. Rumor had it she was struggling to make ends meet, barely surviving. To many in that glittering room, tonight felt like Andrew's victory lap. Yila leaned into him, her crimson gown clinging to her figure. She laughed loudly at his jokes, letting her manicured hand rest possessively on his chest. "You've outdone yourself," one investor muttered to Andrew. "Trading up was the smartest move you've made." Andrew only smirked, basking in the validation. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, drawing attention to the stage. Andrew tightened his grip on Yila's hand, preparing to deliver his big announcement about his company's expansion. He wanted this moment to cement his place among the elite, the ambitious CEO with a glamorous bride-to-be. But just as he stepped toward the spotlight, the heavy double doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open. The music faltered. Conversations froze. Heads turned. There, framed by the gilded doorway, stood Emma Weston. She was radiant, though her dress was simple, a flowing navy gown that could not hide the swell of her pregnant belly. Her hair, loose and shining under the chandelier light, gave her an aura of quiet dignity. She wasn't the broken woman people expected. She wasn't hiding anymore. And she wasn't alone. Beside her walked Victor Hale, the elusive billionaire jet owner whose face rarely appeared in public. He was tall, commanding, with silver at his temples and eyes that radiated power. Everyone in that room knew his name. His fleet of private jets ferried presidents, royalty, and global icons. To see him here, at Emma's side, was nothing short of shocking. A hush swept across the gala like a storm wind. Champagne glasses trembled in midair. The string quartet stopped altogether. Even the chandeliers seemed to flicker with tension. Andrew's smile collapsed. His hand slipped from Yila's arm. His eyes locked on Emma, disbelief flashing across his face. He had mocked her as weak, discarded her as useless. Yet here she was, more formidable than ever, and accompanied by a man who could buy and sell his entire company without blinking. Yila stiffened, her fingers tightening around her clutch. She sensed it too, the shift in the room, the crumbling of the pedestal she thought she stood on. Every camera swiveled. Every whisper turned into a roar. And in that electrifying moment, everyone knew. This night was not Andrew Weston's triumph. It was the beginning of his downfall. Before the gasps of the gala and the shock of her entrance, Emma Weston had lived a life that felt like a faded photograph. Once full of color, now drained by betrayal. She was 28, born and raised in a modest neighborhood in Queens. Her father had been a bus driver, her mother a schoolteacher. They didn't have wealth, but they gave Emma something more valuable: resilience. She carried that resilience with her when she met Andrew Weston in college. He was charming, ambitious, with a smile that could disarm anyone. Back then, he wasn't the arrogant CEO flaunting his success. He was just a young man with dreams, the kind Emma believed in. When they married, Emma gave everything she had. She left her job as an executive assistant to support Andrew's career, managing the household, entertaining his colleagues, and making sure he had the stability he claimed he needed to build his empire. She believed in him so completely that she ignored the small cracks, his late nights, his condescending remarks, the way he started treating her as a shadow rather than a partner. And then came the pregnancy. For Emma, it was a blessing. She dreamed of the tiny kicks, the lullabies, the life she would nurture. She believed the baby would bring them closer, heal the growing distance. But for Andrew, it was a burden. His empire was rising, and he saw fatherhood as an anchor dragging him down. The night he left was etched into her memory like a scar. It was raining, a relentless storm hammering against the windows. She was 6 months pregnant, swollen ankles and an aching back, when Andrew came home with cold eyes. He didn't shout, he didn't cry. He simply said, "I can't do this anymore. You're holding me back." Emma remembered standing in the doorway, clutching her belly, as he walked out with a suitcase. No kiss, no goodbye. Just silence. In the days that followed, the whispers began. Friends she thought were loyal stopped calling. Women at the prenatal clinic gave her pitying looks. His company released a statement about irreconcilable differences, and society quickly painted Emma as the disposable wife who couldn't keep up with her husband's success. Money became tight. Andrew had forced her out of their shared accounts, leaving her with a small apartment and the faint hope that she could rebuild. She clipped coupons, skipped meals to save money for prenatal vitamins, and walked to her doctor's appointments because she couldn't afford cab fare. Each night, she lay awake, whispering to her unborn child, "I'll protect you. I don't know how, but I will." What Andrew never realized was that Emma's strength was forged in silence. Every tear she shed, every humiliation she endured, was not weakness, it was fuel. The image of her sitting on a second-hand couch, staring at eviction notices, one hand on her belly and the other wiping away tears, was enough to break the hardest heart. Yet inside her, something fierce grew alongside the baby, the will to survive. And survival, as fate would prove, would lead her into the path of Victor Hale. But that was later. For now, Emma was still the wounded wife, the expectant mother society had written off. The world saw a broken woman, but those who looked closer, those who truly listened, could see the fire flickering in her eyes. A fire waiting for the right moment to blaze. Andrew Weston had always been ambitious. Even as a college student, he was the one who lingered after lectures, hungry not just for knowledge but for connections. He wasn't content with a degree. He wanted power, wealth, and influence. At first, this drive was admirable. Professors praised his determination. Classmates envied his confidence. Emma, back then a shy but compassionate young woman, believed his ambition was a flame that would light both their futures. When they married, Andrew started small, working as a junior analyst at a mid-level firm. The hours were brutal, the pay unimpressive, but he never came home defeated. Instead, he came home plotting. Over late-night takeout at their tiny apartment, he would tell Emma about the companies he would build, the empire he would command. She listened, smiled, and encouraged him, never realizing that the empire he dreamed of had no room for her once it became real. Andrew's break came when he manipulated a struggling software company into selling cheap. While others saw a dying venture, Andrew saw opportunity. He rebranded, restructured, and marketed it as a revolutionary platform. Investors swarmed, and overnight, Andrew transformed from an overlooked analyst into a rising star. Wealth followed quickly. They moved into a penthouse. He bought designer suits, luxury cars, and treated Emma to extravagant dinners. At least in the beginning. But soon the attention, the spotlight, became intoxicating. Andrew no longer introduced Emma as his partner. She was his wife in the most casual sense, a decorative accessory. Business dinners turned into networking parties where Emma felt invisible. And then came the comments. "You should try harder to look the part," he told her once, glancing at her modest dress while his colleagues' wives shimmered in couture. "Don't embarrass me," he whispered during another gala when her heels made her stumble. The pregnancy was the final wedge. To Emma, it was joy. To Andrew, it was an inconvenience. He was in the middle of expansion talks, negotiating with venture capitalists, and the idea of fatherhood felt like a chain around his ankle. He told colleagues in private that he couldn't be babysitting when there were billions to chase. Behind Emma's back, he began cultivating a new image, a younger, flashier image. That's when Ela Monroe entered the picture. She was everything Emma wasn't, at least in Andrew's warped perspective. A model, glamorous and hungry for fame, she fit neatly into the world Andrew was desperate to impress. Ela didn't question his long hours or his endless boasting. She laughed at his jokes, clung to his arm, and made him feel invincible. The affair started discreetly, lavish gifts, late-night rendezvous under the guise of business meetings. But Andrew's arrogance grew. He no longer feared scandal. He believed himself untouchable. To him, Emma was already obsolete, a woman at home with swollen ankles and grocery coupons, while he dazzled society with a glittering fiancée. One evening, Emma confronted him after finding Ela's perfume on his jacket. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked and said, "You were good for when I was nothing, but I'm not nothing anymore." That sentence became the knife that severed their marriage. Andrew justified everything in the name of ambition. To him, betrayal wasn't betrayal, it was evolution. He discarded Emma like an outdated investment and paraded Ela as proof of his upgrade. What he never understood was that ambition without loyalty is a poison, and that poison was already seeping into the empire he thought was indestructible. Ela Monroe had grown up in the kind of world where beauty was currency and ambition was survival. Born in Miami to a struggling single mother, she learned early that charm could open doors money couldn't. By 16, she was walking runways at local fashion shows. By 18, she had moved to New York, determined to claw her way into the glossy magazines she pored over as a child. The modeling world was brutal. For every glamorous photo shoot, there were 10 humiliations: being dismissed for not being exotic enough, being told to lose more weight, being treated as disposable. Hila didn't just survive it, she weaponized it. She built a persona of untouchable glamour, training herself to laugh when men in power made empty promises, to flirt when investors looked her way, and to cry only when it benefited her. So when she met Andrew Weston at a high-profile launch party, she recognized him instantly, not for who he was, but for what he could be for her. Andrew wasn't the richest man in the room, nor the most handsome, but his hunger was obvious, his need to prove himself practically oozing from every gesture. Hila smelled opportunity. She approached with calculated charm, brushing against his arm, accidentally, complimenting his tie, pretending she hadn't heard of his company, when in fact she had researched him the night before. Andrew was smitten within an hour. To him, Hila represented validation. To her, Andrew was a ladder. From the beginning, Hila knew about Emma. She knew Andrew had a pregnant wife at home. It didn't matter. If anything, it thrilled her. Taking another woman's husband was, in Hila's mind, a victory, a public declaration of her superiority. "Why settle for being someone's girlfriend?" she once told a fellow model, "when you can be the reason another woman cries?" Her arrogance grew with Andrew's attention. The more he showered her with gifts, designer gowns, diamond bracelets, first-class vacations, the bolder she became. She flaunted their relationship on social media with cryptic captions, posting pictures of champagne glasses clinking across candle-lit tables, careful never to show Andrew's face, but revealing just enough for gossip to ignite. Behind closed doors, Hila was shrewd. She pushed Andrew to distance himself further from Emma, mocking him whenever he hesitated. "Do you want to be a powerful man or a family man?" she taunted. "Because you can't be both." Her words fed his ego while poisoning his conscience. At galas and charity events, Hila played her role flawlessly. She draped herself across Andrew's arm, her laughter high and effortless, her smile practiced to perfection. But behind the eyeshadow and diamonds lay a calculating mind. Hila wasn't in love with Andrew. She was in love with the world Andrew could deliver. Front row seats at Fashion Week, interviews in Vogue, contracts with luxury brands who valued the Weston name. Her cruelty toward Emma was subtle at first, a raised eyebrow, a dismissive glance when Emma's name came up in conversation. But as Andrew grew bolder in flaunting her, Hila sharpened her claws. She whispered to mutual acquaintances, "Poor Emma, some women just aren't built for men like Andrew." The poison spread quickly through society circles, isolating Emma even further. What Hila didn't know, what her arrogance blinded her to, was that she was building her pedestal on sand. Andrew's empire wasn't as unshakable as she believed. His arrogance, combined with her hunger for status, would draw attention neither of them wanted. And when the tide turned, Hila would discover that society is quick to worship beauty, but even quicker to devour it when the shine fades. For now, though, Hila stood at Andrew's side like a queen, basking in stolen glory, convinced that Emma was gone for good. The Bright Horizons Gala had always been a stage for wealth and power, but that night it became a theater for scandal. Andrew Weston stood proudly on stage, Hila Monroe clinging to his arm, preparing to announce his company's newest expansion. The room buzzed with admiration and envy. Cameras snapped. Glasses clinked. To Andrew, it felt like a coronation. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying over the hush. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is not just about charity. It's about celebrating vision, courage, and the future." His hand tightened around Hila's waist as if to punctuate the point. "I'm proud to share this moment with my fiancée, Hila Monroe." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Whispers erupted. "Fiancée?" The words sliced through the crowd like a blade. Everyone knew Emma. Everyone knew she was still pregnant. The brazenness left mouths agape, but Andrew basked in the attention. He believed he had just written the final chapter of his past. Then the doors opened. At first, no one moved. The sound of heavy oak swinging wide echoed like a gunshot. Heads turned, the orchestra faltered, and there she was, Emma Weston. Her navy gown shimmered under the chandelier, elegant yet modest. Her hair flowed naturally over her shoulders, her makeup subtle but luminous. She wasn't the broken woman people had pitied. She wasn't hiding anymore. And her rounded belly, unmistakably pregnant, was on full display as she stepped forward with calm poise. The silence was suffocating. Some guests covered their mouths, others whispered furiously. Phones lifted discreetly, recording the moment. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was history unfolding in real time. Andrew's confident smirk collapsed. His grip on Hila faltered. For the first time that evening, he looked uncertain, almost small. "Emma?" he whispered, though no one could hear him over the rising tide of murmurs. But Emma wasn't alone. Walking beside her was Victor Hale, the billionaire jet owner whose fortune and influence dwarfed Andrew's entire empire. His presence was magnetic. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm authority that needed no introduction, Victor's hand rested gently but protectively on Emma's back. To the crowd, the message was clear. She was not abandoned, not alone. She was shielded by power greater than Andrew could ever dream of. "Is that Victor Hale?" someone gasped near the bar. "The man who owns Hale Aviation?" Another whispered. "What's he doing with her?" Emma's chin lifted as she crossed the marble floor, every step echoing like a drumbeat. She didn't flinch at the stairs, didn't lower her eyes. For months she had cried behind closed doors, curled up in a cheap apartment, abandoned and humiliated. But tonight, she was reborn. She stopped only a few feet from the stage. The entire room was suspended between breaths. Andrew's face drained of color. Hila shifted uncomfortably, her nails digging into his arm. She had wanted to make Emma invisible. Instead, Emma had just stolen every gaze in the room. Victor leaned slightly toward Emma, his voice low but audible to those nearest. "You don't have to say a word, they already see." And it was true. The contrast was devastating. On one side of the stage, Andrew flaunted arrogance and betrayal, holding on to a mistress desperate for relevance. On the other, Emma stood radiant, carrying life within her, supported by a man whose very name commanded respect across continents. The crowd knew instantly who the true winner was. And for Andrew Weston, the nightmare had only just begun. The name Victor Hale carried weight heavier than gold. In financial circles, it was synonymous with aviation dominance. His fleet of luxury jets ferried world leaders, royalty, and Hollywood elites. His company contracts stretched from Washington to Dubai, and his signature alone could shift markets. Yet for all his wealth, Victor rarely appeared in public. He was known for his reclusive nature, the kind of man who let power speak in silence. That night, however, silence wasn't enough. He had chosen to step into the storm with Emma at his side. The moment Victor entered, the gala shifted. It was as though the air itself thickened, as if the chandeliers glowed brighter to mark his arrival. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Even the most seasoned socialites, accustomed to brushing shoulders with billionaires, found themselves straightening their posture when his presence filled the room. Andrew Weston, who had strutted through the ballroom hours earlier as though he owned it, suddenly looked like a child who had stolen his father's suit. His shoulders stiffened, his mouth parted in disbelief. He had spent years climbing, clawing, and scheming to be noticed by men like Victor Hale. And now Victor stood only a few steps away, but not as his peer. No, Victor was standing beside the woman Andrew had discarded. Victor's gaze was calm but sharp, the kind that could slice through pretension. He didn't glare, didn't sneer, he didn't need to. His hand, steady on the small of Emma's back, sent a message more devastating than any insult. "She is under my protection." Emma drew strength from it. For months, she had carried the crushing weight of abandonment. Tonight, that weight lifted, not because Victor saved her, but because he stood as proof that she was worthy of being valued. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "She's with him?" one woman muttered. Victor Hale, the jet magnate, a man in a tuxedo, nearly dropped his champagne flute. "That's not just money, that's global power." Andrew's jaw tightened. He tried to recover his composure, forcing a laugh that fell flat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice cracking slightly into the microphone, "it seems we've had unexpected guests." But the crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. Their eyes were fixed on Victor. Cameras clicked feverishly, flashes lighting up the ballroom like lightning. Reporters whispered about tomorrow's headlines: "Pregnant ex-wife returns with billionaire ally." Hila, still clutching Andrew's arm, leaned in and whispered, "What is she doing with him?" Her smile trembled, the sheen of her confidence cracking. Victor finally spoke. His voice was low, resonant, and carried easily across the hall. "We didn't come to disrupt," he said, every syllable deliberate. "We came to support a cause worth more than vanity." His eyes flicked briefly toward Andrew, just long enough for everyone to understand the sting. It was a masterstroke. He hadn't insulted Andrew outright, but he didn't have to. The contrast was already brutal. Andrew flaunted betrayal and selfishness. Victor embodied dignity and loyalty. Emma stood a little taller beside him, her hand resting protectively over her belly. The sight was almost biblical. A betrayed woman reborn in strength, guarded by a man whose empire outshone her ex-husband's hollow triumphs. And though Andrew tried to continue his speech, his words drowned beneath the weight of the crowd's shifting loyalty. They weren't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. At them. The king of the night had been dethroned, and his replacement had just walked through the door. Long before the glittering chandeliers of the gala, before the whispers and flashing cameras, Emma's path had crossed with Victor Hale's in a far quieter, lonelier place, an airport terminal. It was a gray afternoon in late autumn. Emma, 6 months pregnant and exhausted, sat slumped on a worn leather bench at LaGuardia Airport. She clutched a folded eviction notice in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. Her eyes were red, her shoulders heavy, her dress stretched tight across her growing belly. She had come to the airport not to fly, but to think. Sometimes, when the walls of her tiny apartment closed in, she came here to watch planes rise into the sky, to remind herself that escape was possible, even if it wasn't for her. That day, escape felt like a cruel joke. Her body ached, her ankles swollen, and tears kept slipping past her lashes, no matter how hard she tried to hold them back. Strangers bustled past, businessmen in suits, families with children, young couples laughing. To them, she was invisible. Just another tired woman, pregnant and alone. Until Victor Hale noticed her. He had been on his way to his private terminal, surrounded by assistants juggling phones and briefcases. To most, he was untouchable, a man encased in steel and wealth. But something about the sight of Emma, small and weary on that bench, caught him. He slowed, something he never did, and watched her for a moment. When Emma bent forward, clutching her belly as a sharp cramp shot through her, Victor acted without hesitation. He dismissed his entourage with a flick of his hand and crossed the terminal. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice deep but unexpectedly gentle. Emma tried to smile, tried to insist she was fine, but her lips trembled, and her body betrayed her with another spasm of pain. I just need a minute," she whispered. Victor knelt beside her, ignoring the curious stares of passers-by. "You don't look fine," he said firmly. "Let me call someone for you." Pride prickled in Emma's chest. She didn't want help, didn't want pity. But the sincerity in his eyes disarmed her. It wasn't pity, it was concern. Against her instincts, she nodded. He personally drove her to the hospital that afternoon. Not an assistant, not a chauffeur. He. While doctors confirmed she was experiencing stress-induced contractions, Victor waited outside, arms crossed, his jaw tight. When the doctor reassured him the baby was safe but urged Emma to rest and avoid strain, Victor exhaled slowly, relief flickering across his usually stoic face. Afterward, Emma tried to thank him with awkward gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly as he walked her back to the car. Victor looked at her for a long moment. "No one else was going to," he replied simply. In the weeks that followed, he checked in. At first, just brief calls. "Are you eating? Did you make your appointment?" Then visits, dropping off groceries, arranging discreet financial help without insulting her pride. Emma resisted at first, suspicious of his motives. But Victor never asked for anything in return. He didn't pry, didn't judge. He simply showed up. Slowly, Emma began to trust him. He became a quiet constant in her unraveling world, a reminder that not all men abandoned when life grew heavy. So when Victor walked beside her into the gala months later, his hand steady on her back, it wasn't spectacle. It wasn't performance. It was the culmination of a bond forged in silence, in hardship, in moments no camera would ever capture. And though the world saw a billionaire protecting a pregnant ex-wife, Emma knew the truth. He wasn't saving her. He was standing with her. Because from the moment they met, He had seen her worth, even when she couldn't. Long before the bright lights of the gala, before Victor's steady hand at her back, Emma lived nights that would have broken most women. Nights where silence screamed louder than thunder, and loneliness gnawed at her like a hunger that never ended. Her apartment was small, one bedroom, peeling paint, the kind of place where the radiator clanked at odd hours. The rent was barely affordable, but it was all she had after Andrew cut her off. The penthouse they once shared, with its panoramic city views, belonged to him now, paraded online with Hila posing in silk robes for photographers. Emma tried not to look, but the images found her anyway, on magazine covers at grocery stores, on news feeds she hadn't even clicked. She cried in silence, not the loud sobs of anger, but the quiet tears of someone too exhausted to fight. She would lie on the second-hand couch, one hand over her swollen belly, whispering to the child growing inside her. "I'm sorry. I'll do better for you. Just hold on a little longer." The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter for days, an unspoken threat. She skipped meals to stretch what little she had, telling herself she wasn't hungry. But the truth was, she gave up food so she could buy prenatal vitamins. Her baby came first, always. Sometimes when the loneliness was unbearable, she walked to the park at night. She would sit on a bench, watching families pass by, fathers pushing strollers, mothers laughing with toddlers. Each sight was a knife in her chest. Her child would never know that picture-perfect family. Instead, they would grow up with the knowledge that their father had chosen another woman over them before they were even born. Emma's lowest moment came one stormy night. She had spent the afternoon trying to repair a leaky faucet, water pooling across the cracked tiles of her kitchen. Her back ached, her feet were swollen, and the baby kicked restlessly as if sensing her despair. She slid down against the wall, water dripping onto her arms, and for the first time, she whispered the words she had fought so hard to avoid. "I can't do this alone." Her phone buzzed then. It was Victor checking in again. She almost ignored it. Her pride screamed at her to stop leaning on him. But his message was simple. "Just making sure you're okay. No need to answer." And something in her broke. She typed back with trembling fingers, "I'm not." He was at her door less than an hour later, bringing warm food, a plumber, and the kind of quiet reassurance no one had given her in months. That night, as she fell asleep, she realized she wasn't entirely alone anymore. But the scars of abandonment were still carved deep. Every ultrasound appointment she attended by herself reminded her of Andrew's betrayal. Every socialite whisper that she was washed up drove the knife deeper. The humiliation of watching Hila flaunt stolen happiness on Andrew's arm burned like acid. And yet, in that pit of despair, something fierce began to grow. A resolve sharper than steel. Emma decided that if the world wanted to see her broken, she would stand taller. If Andrew thought she would beg, she would make him regret underestimating her. Her darkest nights had stripped her bare, but they had also forged her. Like steel and fire, Emma Weston was being reshaped into something stronger, sharper, unstoppable. No one at the gala knew the depth of her suffering. They only saw the surface, a glowing woman with a powerful man at her side. But beneath that glow lay scars, and those scars were her armor. And soon, Andrew would learn that the woman he discarded was not broken. She was reborn. The ballroom had not recovered from Emma's entrance. Whispers swirled like a storm, cameras clicked with frantic urgency, and every pair of eyes flickered between Andrew Weston and the woman he had abandoned. The tension was electric, charged with the unspoken question, what will he do now? Andrew's chest heaved as he gripped the microphone. For a man who thrived on control, his composure was slipping fast. He scanned the room, saw the judgment in the eyes of investors, the smug delight in rivals, and worst of all, the quiet dignity radiating from Emma. That dignity burned him like acid. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andrew began, forcing a smirk that wavered at the edges, "I suppose you've all noticed an unexpected guest." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, but no one joined him. "This is my ex-wife," he continued, gesturing toward Emma with a dismissive wave. "A woman who, unfortunately, could not handle the pressures of success. Some people just aren't built for this world." Gasps rippled again, but this time sharper. Emma's hand instinctively pressed against her belly, her jaw tightening. Andrew's words weren't just meant to wound, they were designed to humiliate her publicly. to reduce her to a cautionary tale. He wasn't finished. His voice rose, desperate to reclaim dominance. You see, while some cling to the past, others move forward. That's why I chose Hila. She represents the future: beauty, ambition, strength, not weakness and dependency. His eyes locked onto Emma's belly with cruel emphasis. Dragging a child into this world without stability? That's reckless. The cruelty was brutal, a dagger aimed at her most vulnerable place. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others whispered in disapproval. Even Hila's smile faltered. But Andrew pressed on, convinced that tearing Emma down was his only way to stand tall again. And then Victor stepped forward. The billionaire didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence silenced the room as he took the microphone from Andrew with calm authority. Andrew's protest, "Hey, that's mine," was ignored, drowned in the hush that fell over the crowd. Victor's gaze swept the ballroom, steady and piercing. "Reckless?" he repeated, his voice smooth yet edged with steel. "I see a woman who carried a child alone after being discarded. I see strength where others only see convenience. And I see someone who deserves admiration, not ridicule." He turned slightly, his hand brushing Emma's arm, steadying her. "It takes no courage to flaunt a mistress. It takes courage to face the world when it tries to break you and still stand tall." The room erupted in murmurs of agreement. Heads nodded. Some clapped softly. Andrew's face flushed red, his jaw clenching as he tried to speak, but Victor wasn't finished. He leaned just enough toward Andrew, his voice dropping lower, intimate but deadly. "You called her weak. Yet she stands here with dignity while you scramble to justify your betrayal. Weakness isn't in her. Weakness is hiding behind someone else's beauty because you fear you have none of your own." The impact was devastating. The audience's sympathy shifted entirely. Emma wasn't the broken wife anymore. She was the woman wronged, standing beside a man whose words carried truth and authority. Andrew, once the host of the gala, looked like an intruder at his own celebration. Hila pulled her arm from his, eyes darting nervously at the guests whispering about her. Investors exchanged knowing looks. Phones buzzed as reporters typed headlines. "Victor Hale defends pregnant ex-wife against CEO's cruelty." Emma exhaled slowly, her spine straightening. She hadn't spoken a word, yet she had won. Because sometimes silence paired with the right ally was louder than any speech. Andrew had tried to humiliate her. Instead, he had humiliated himself. And the night was far from over. The ballroom was already thick with tension. Emma's quiet strength and Victor's devastating defense had turned the tide of sympathy. Andrew Weston, once the host basking in admiration, now stood on stage sweating under the chandeliers, his confidence shattered. But the night hadn't even delivered its most brutal blow yet. It started with a vibration of phones, a ripple of notifications flashing across the room. At first, it was subtle, guests discreetly glancing at their screens, brows furrowing, lips parting. Then the whispers spread like wildfire. "Is this real?" Someone gasped near the champagne fountain. Another clutched her husband's sleeve. "Oh my God, it's about Andrew." Andrew noticed the shift immediately. The attention that had once been his lifeblood now turned toxic, eyes narrowing, murmurs rising. He tried to continue his speech, his voice faltering. "As I was saying, Weston Financial is stronger than ever." But he was interrupted by the loud chime of a reporter's phone on the press balcony. The reporter's face lit up with a mixture of shock and glee. "Breaking news," he shouted before he could stop himself. "Andrew Weston under investigation for fraud and embezzlement." The room exploded. Guests gasped, reporters scrambled, and cameras turned on Andrew like predators circling wounded prey. The whispers sharpened into daggers. "Embezzlement? Didn't he claim record profits last quarter? I knew those numbers didn't add up." Andrew's face drained of color. "That's ridiculous," he barked, his voice cracking. "It's lies. Competitors trying to smear me." But it was too late. Screens lit up with headlines. SEC launches probe into Weston Financial. Allegations of embezzlement surface. Emails and news alerts blasted across devices, complete with leaked documents. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, suspicious loans. The timing was merciless. Victor Hale didn't move, but his eyes locked on Andrew with quiet certainty. To him, this wasn't surprising. Powerful men always left trails, and arrogance made those trails impossible to hide forever. Hila Monroe, still clutching her diamond-studded clutch, felt her stomach drop. She glanced at Andrew, her smile frozen, her mind already calculating the damage. A model's career thrived on luxury brands and public approval. Association with a disgraced CEO? It was social suicide. She discreetly stepped an inch away from him, pretending to adjust her gown. Andrew saw it. His fiancée, the prize he had flaunted, was already retreating. Panic gripped him. He pounded the microphone, desperate. "None of this is true. Do you think I'd risk everything? I am Weston Financial. Without me, half of you wouldn't have your portfolios." But the audience wasn't listening. Investors slipped out to make frantic calls. Donors whispered about pull-in pledges. Photographers captured every twitch of his unraveling face. What was meant to be Andrew's crowning night had turned into the opening scene of his downfall. Emma stood silently at Victor's side, her expression calm. She hadn't orchestrated this. Fate had. But she couldn't deny the poetic justice. The man who had called her weak was now crumbling under the weight of his own corruption, exposed for the fraud he was. Victor leaned close to her, his voice a low murmur only she could hear. "You don't need revenge, Emma. The truth will always do the work for you." Her hand brushed her belly, and for the first time in months she felt a flicker of peace. Andrew was collapsing under the same spotlight he had once used to blind her. The gala had been meant to showcase his triumph. Instead, it had revealed his rot. And Emma, radiant and unbroken, was standing tall as the world finally saw the man Andrew Weston truly was. If the breaking news about Andrew's financial crimes had cracked the foundation of the gala, Yila Monroe's reaction was the hammer that shattered it completely. For a long moment, she stood frozen on Andrew's arm, her smile plastered on like porcelain, her eyes darting rapidly as the crowd devoured the scandal. Reporters shouted questions, investors whispered urgently into their phones, and the once glorious spotlight that had bathed Andrew in admiration now burned with accusation. And Yila, ever the opportunist, calculated her next move. She had fought too hard, climbed too far to let herself drown with him. Andrew had been useful, a stepping stone into elite circles, a ticket to front rows and glossy magazine features. But now, he was poison. The brands that courted her, the photographers who praised her, none would touch her if she stayed tethered to a man accused of embezzlement. Andrew felt her hand stiffen against his arm. He looked at her, desperate, his voice a hiss under the hum of chaos. "Don't just stand there, say something. They need to see we're united." Yila blinked, her lashes fluttering like wings over calculating eyes. Then slowly, deliberately, she slipped her hand from his. The detachment was subtle, but to the crowd it screamed louder than any declaration. She was stepping away. The photographers caught it instantly. Flashbulbs ignited like fireworks as her diamond bracelet glinted in the light. Headlines were already being written. Model fiancée distances herself from disgraced CEO. Andrew's face crumpled. "What are you doing?" he demanded, panic rising in his voice. Yila tilted her head, her lips curving into the faintest, cruelest smile. "Damage control," she whispered. She turned to the nearest camera, her expression softening into practiced vulnerability. "I had no idea," she said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "I never wanted to be caught in something dishonest." Her voice trembled, perfectly timed. "I thought he was different." Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Guests leaned in, devouring every word. Yila, the glamorous fiancée, was now recasting herself as the victim. It was a performance honed over years in the modeling world, where survival meant rewriting the narrative before anyone else could. Andrew's rage boiled over. "You liar," he snapped, his voice cracking. "You knew everything. You wanted this life. Don't you dare act innocent now." The outburst only sealed his fate. Cameras zoomed in on his red face, his trembling hands, his fiancée recoiling in apparent fear. In a single moment, Andrew was no longer the powerful CEO betrayed by headlines. He was a man abandoned by the very woman he had flaunted as his victory prize. Yila stepped back, clutching her clutch like a shield. "I can't be part of this," she whispered dramatically, though her voice carried far enough for the microphones to catch. "I have my career, my integrity. I need to protect myself." The crowd was merciless. Whispers turned into laughter, shaking heads murmured condemnations. "Did you see that?" She dropped him like a stone. Typical. He traded his wife for someone who'd trade him back even faster. Emma, watching from Victor's side, didn't smile. She didn't need to. The sight spoke for itself. Yila's betrayal was poetic justice. Andrew had thrown away loyalty for vanity, only to be discarded by vanity itself. Andrew's knees nearly buckled. He tried to call after her as Hila moved toward the exit, her heels clicking decisively against the marble. "Hila, don't walk away from me." But she didn't look back. The cameras followed her departure, capturing every angle, every step that widened the chasm between them. By the time she disappeared through the double doors, Andrew Weston was alone, truly, utterly alone, surrounded by wealth and power that no longer wanted him. And that loneliness, that public abandonment, cut deeper than any headline ever could. The chaos of the ballroom still echoed behind her, but Emma found herself pulled into the quieter corridors of the hotel by a sudden commotion. A voice, sharp and high-pitched, carried through the hall. "Hila Monroe." The model had slipped away from the main stage, her mask of practiced poise cracking under the pressure. She stood near a gilt-framed mirror, frantically adjusting her hair, her eyes darting like a trapped animal's. The sound of cameras faded here. This was the space between spectacle and reality. And into that silence stepped Emma. For the first time since the gala began, Emma and Hila faced each other without Andrew between them. It was just the betrayed wife and the woman who had flaunted herself as the upgrade. The air between them crackled with history. Neither had spoken aloud. Hila broke the silence first, her tone dripping venom. "You must be loving this, aren't you? Watching him fall apart, watching me, us, fall apart." Emma's voice was calm but firm. "No, I'm not enjoying it. I don't celebrate pain, but I won't deny the truth either. What you two did was cruel, and cruelty always circles back." Hila scoffed, tossing her hair. "Please, don't act like you're some saint. You couldn't keep him happy. That's why he came to me." Emma's eyes flickered, but her resolve didn't waver. "No, that's what he told you to make you feel special. But it's not about happiness. It's about greed. Andrew never wanted a partner. He wanted a mirror to reflect his ego. And you gave him that until the reflection cracked." Hila bristled, her claws coming out. "I'm still better than you. At least I know how to survive in his world. Look at you. You're pregnant, broke, abandoned. You think one night with Victor Hale changes that? You're nothing compared to me." Emma stepped closer, her voice low and cutting. "Nothing. I carried his child when he walked out the door. I faced eviction while you flaunted jewelry he bought with stolen money. I survived every sleepless night alone. And through it all, I never stopped protecting the life inside me. That's not nothing, Hila. That's strength you'll never understand." For a moment, Hila faltered. The words pierced through her bravado, striking something raw. She masked it quickly with a smirk, but her eyes betrayed the sting. Emma continued, her tone sharper now. "You thought you won because you took my husband, but what did you really win? A liar, a criminal, a man who traded loyalty for vanity. And when the fire came, he didn't protect you, he dragged you down with him." Hila's smirk faltered entirely. She gripped her clutch tighter, nails digging into the leather. "At least he chose me," she whispered bitterly. Emma shook her head. "No. He didn't choose you. He chose what you represented. A distraction, a shiny object. And when you stopped shining, he would have chosen someone else. That's not love. That's emptiness." The words hung heavy in the air. Hila looked away, her shoulders trembling, though whether with anger or shame was unclear. Emma's voice softened, though it carried the weight of finality. "You can keep telling yourself you were the winner. But I don't need to win against you. I just need to rise above both of you. And tonight, I already have." Hila's lips parted, but no words came. For once, the model who thrived on attention was speechless. Emma turned and walked back toward the gala, her steps steady, her back straight. Behind her, Hila stared at her reflection in the mirror, the cracks in her carefully built persona finally too wide to ignore. It wasn't Emma who looked defeated in that hallway. It was Hila. Emma returned to the ballroom with her head held high after her confrontation with Hila, but inside, her body trembled. The adrenaline of the evening, the piercing words exchanged, and the crushing weight of public attention all churned together in her chest. She pressed her hand against her belly, whispering silently to her child, "Hold on. Please hold on." Victor noticed instantly. His eyes, sharp and calculating in business, softened the moment he saw her complexion pale. "Emma," he murmured, stepping closer, "you need to sit down." But Emma shook her head. "Not here. Not in front of them." She glanced at the cameras still flashing, the investors still whispering, Andrew pacing wildly on stage. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her weak. Then it happened. A sharp, stabbing pain shot across her abdomen. Her breath caught, her hand tightening on Victor's sleeve. Her knees buckled, and for one terrifying second, she felt the floor tilt beneath her. Gasps rippled through the nearest guests as Victor caught her just before she collapsed. "Emma." Victor's voice thundered, more commanding than any speech he had given that night. He lowered her gently into a chair, his arm cradling her protectively. Panic flared across the ballroom. Some rushed forward, others backed away, but every camera clicked furiously, capturing the moment. Andrew froze, his face twisted with something between shock and fear. For a split second, his mask of arrogance cracked. He looked at Emma, his abandoned wife, clutching her belly, fighting to breathe, and the reality struck him. She was carrying his child. His child. But instead of rushing to her side, Andrew faltered. His pride shackled him. Moving toward her now would look weak, hypocritical. So he stayed rooted, sweating under the glare of the chandeliers, while the world watched him do nothing. Victor barked orders with precision. "Call an ambulance now," he demanded. A staff member fumbled for their phone. Another rushed to fetch water. Victor kept his hand on Emma's shoulder, his voice steady, grounding her. "Stay with me, Emma. Focus on my voice. You're safe." Emma's breaths came in shallow gasps. Tears blurred her vision. "The baby," she whispered. Victor leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "The baby is strong. You're strong. Nothing is going to happen. Not while I'm here." Those words, calm and resolute, anchored her. She squeezed his hand, clinging to that lifeline. The crowd, once hungry for scandal, now watched with rapt silence. Many had tears in their eyes. A socialite whispered she shouldn't be under this stress. "Look at her. She's fighting for her child while he," she glanced bitterly at Andrew, "stands there doing nothing." When the paramedics arrived, Victor didn't hesitate. He scooped Emma into his arms, carrying her as though she weighed nothing, his expression carved in determination. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the image. The billionaire holding the pregnant ex-wife, rushing her to safety, while her ex-husband looked on, paralyzed by his own cowardice. Emma, drifting in and out of focus, felt the rhythm of Victor's heartbeat against her cheek. It was steady, unwavering. In that moment, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. The ambulance doors closed behind them, sirens wailing into the night. The gala had begun as Andrew's showcase, but it ended with Victor and Emma vanishing into the city lights, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget the image of loyalty and betrayal laid bare. And as the sirens faded, so too did the last illusion of Andrew Weston's control. The sterile white walls of St. Mary's Hospital hummed with fluorescent light. Machines beeped softly, the rhythmic reassurance that both mother and child were still holding on. Emma lay propped up against a stack of pillows, her gown loose around her shoulders, her skin pale. The pain had dulled, but the exhaustion clung to her like a heavy blanket. She stared at the ceiling, the pattern of tiles blurring as memories invaded, memories she had tried to bury but could not silence. She remembered the night Andrew told her it was over. The way he stood by the window of their penthouse, city lights glittering behind him, and said flatly, "I can't do this anymore. You're dragging me down." She remembered begging, her hands pressed over her belly, whispering, "What about the baby?" And the way he had turned away without answering. The ache of that abandonment was sharper than any physical pain. Tears pricked her eyes, sliding hot down her temples. She pressed a hand over her belly, whispering to the child inside, "I'm still here. I won't leave you. Not like he did." Her voice cracked, breaking the silence of the hospital room. The door creaked open. Victor stepped in quietly, his tall frame softened by the dim light. He carried a paper bag in one hand and a small bouquet of lilies in the other. Without a word, he set them on the table beside her bed, his movements steady, almost ritualistic. "I thought you might want something real," he said, pulling out a container of homemade soup. "Hospital food isn't exactly known for comfort." Emma let out a shaky laugh, wiping at her tears. "You didn't have to." "I did," Victor replied simply. He pulled a chair close to her bed, sitting with the calm presence of someone who wasn't going anywhere. For a while, they sat in silence. Victor ladled soup into a cup, holding it out until Emma reluctantly took a sip. The warmth spread through her, soothing in a way medicine couldn't. "You don't have to stay," Emma murmured after a moment. "I know you're busy. You have a whole empire to run." Victor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on hers. "Emma, there's nowhere else I need to be right now." The words landed heavier than she expected. She had heard grand declarations before. Andrew had been full of them. But Victor's tone was different. It wasn't boastful, it wasn't performative. It was quiet, grounded, and true. Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are you doing all this for me, for us?" Victor hesitated, then spoke with honesty. "Because I see you, not as Andrew's ex-wife, not as some story for the tabloids. I see a woman who was left behind, who's been carrying more than her share of pain, and still, you're here, still fighting. That kind of strength deserves someone who won't walk away." Emma's lips trembled. No one had said words like that to her in so long. She turned her face, embarrassed by the tears slipping down her cheeks. Victor reached out, his hand covering hers where it rested on her belly. His palm was warm, steady, grounding her. "You're not alone anymore, Emma," he said quietly. Her heart clenched, not with pain but with something unfamiliar. Hope. Outside the window, the city glittered, indifferent and cold. But inside that hospital room, for the first time in months, Emma felt safe. Not because her problems had vanished, but because someone finally chose to stay. And as Victor kept watch by her bedside, Emma drifted into sleep, her tears drying into the faintest smile. The days that followed Emma's hospital scare blurred into a quiet rhythm. Nurses checked her vitals, doctors urged rest, and Victor Hale remained a constant presence, calm, steady, unshakable. He wasn't just visiting, he was anchoring her. Each morning he arrived before sunrise, bringing fresh flowers or books he thought she might enjoy. Each evening he left only when she insisted, promising to return. Emma noticed the way he handled the smallest details, speaking with doctors, making sure her insurance paperwork was handled, even gently reminding her to eat when her appetite faltered. It wasn't grand gestures that touched her most. It was the simple, unwavering consistency. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled through the blinds, Emma sat up in bed, her hand resting on her rounded belly. Victor sat in the chair beside her, scanning a stack of emails on his tablet. He looked powerful even in stillness, his silver hair catching the light. "Why do you do it?" Emma asked suddenly. Victor looked up, brow furrowing. "Do what?" "All of this." She gestured weakly to the room, to him. "You could be anywhere else, with anyone else. You don't owe me anything." Victor set the tablet aside, his eyes, sharp yet gentle, locked on hers. "Emma, I've built an empire. Jets, contracts, influence. Yes, I have all of it. But what's the point if I can't use it to protect someone who actually deserves it? You're not a burden. You're a fighter. I'm just making sure you have the space to fight." Emma's throat tightened. For months she had believed she was nothing more than discarded baggage, left to rot in Andrew's shadow. But hearing Victor frame her not as weak, but as strong, it lit something inside her she thought had been extinguished. That night, after Victor left, Emma looked at her reflection in the hospital mirror. Her hair was messy, her face pale, dark circles under her eyes. Yet for the first time she didn't see a victim, she saw a survivor. Memories of Andrew's words, "You're holding me back," echoed in her mind. She clenched her fists. He was wrong. She wasn't holding anyone back. She had carried herself through hell and was still standing. The next morning, Emma asked for her laptop. Victor raised a brow when he saw it on her lap. "Back to work already?" Emma nodded, determination sparking in her eyes. "I can't hide anymore. I need to start building something for myself, for my child. I spent too long building Andrew's empire. This time I'm building mine." Victor smiled faintly, admiration in his gaze. "That's the Emma I saw the first day we met." The hours that followed were filled with quiet focus. Emma made lists, drafted plans, reached out to contacts she hadn't spoken to in years. She wasn't sure what shape her future business would take. Consulting, design, maybe even a foundation for single mothers. But for the first time she felt in control. Each keystroke was an act of defiance, each note a promise. She would no longer be defined by Andrew's betrayal. That evening, as Victor helped her adjust her pillows, she looked at him with gratitude she couldn't fully voice. "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost," she whispered. Victor tilted his head. "What's that?" Emma's lips curved faintly. Myself. The room was quiet, but the shift inside her was seismic. She was no longer the woman cowering under Andrew's shadow. She was no longer merely surviving. She was preparing to rise. And when she did, the world, including Andrew Weston, would never forget it. The grand Weston mansion stood like a monument to arrogance. Glass walls, polished stone, fountains that sparkled under the moonlight. For years, Andrew Weston had treated it as proof of his triumph, a fortress where he entertained investors and flaunted his wealth. Tonight, it became a stage for his downfall. Inside, Andrew paced furiously across the marble floors. The gala had ended in chaos, his fiancée gone, his reputation bleeding out across every news outlet. He had spent hours on the phone with lawyers, shouting until his throat burned, demanding they fix this. But even his most expensive attorneys couldn't silence the storm of evidence flooding the media. Offshore accounts, falsified reports, investor complaints. For the first time in years, Andrew felt fear claw at his chest. "Sir," his house manager stammered nervously from the doorway, "there are cars outside." Andrew froze. The sound of tires on gravel, heavy boots on stone, and then the unmistakable knock of authority. "Andrew Weston," a commanding voice called through the door. "This is the SEC and the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest." The words shattered him. "No, no, no." Andrew muttered, backing away as the door burst open. Federal agents stormed in, suits and badges flashing, their presence undeniable. They moved with precision, their voices clipped and professional. "Hands where we can see them. Step aside." Andrew's face contorted with rage. "You can't do this. I built this empire. I am Weston Financial." But the agents didn't flinch. One read aloud the charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. Each word was a nail in the coffin of his empire. Cameras outside captured every moment, news vans parked at the gates, their lights cutting through the night like judgment itself. Neighbors gathered at the edge of the property, whispering, pointing. Some recorded videos on their phones. The man who once hosted glittering parties now stood in his own living room, wrists cuffed in steel. Andrew's arrogance cracked into desperation. "Wait, I can explain. It's a misunderstanding." But no one listened. The agents led him past the grand staircase, past the portraits he had commissioned of himself and Ela, past the imported chandeliers he once boasted about. Now every symbol of wealth mocked him. Flashes exploded the moment he stepped outside. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward. "Andrew, did you embezzle company funds? What about your investors? Is it true you left your pregnant wife with nothing?" That last question hit like a blow. Andrew's head jerked up, his face twisting. He had thought discarding Emma was a private act, something buried under his charm and PR. Now the world knew and despised him for it. The agents shoved him into the back of a black SUV, his wrists chained, his empire collapsing around him. Inside the mansion, silence fell. The fountains still trickled, the lights still glowed, but the house felt hollow, stripped of its illusion of power. Across the city, Emma watched the news from her hospital room. The broadcast showed Andrew being pushed into the SUV, reporters swarming like vultures. She stared for a long moment, her hand resting on her belly. Victor, seated beside her, glanced at the screen, then at her. "Justice," he said simply. Emma nodded slowly. It wasn't triumph she felt, but closure. The man who had abandoned her, mocked her, tried to destroy her, was now destroyed by his own greed. The world finally saw him for what he truly was. And Emma, once the woman left behind, had already begun writing her new story. While Andrew Weston was dragged from his mansion in handcuffs, Ela Monroe faced her own reckoning. Not in a courtroom, but in the ruthless world of fashion and public opinion. The morning after the gala, her phone exploded with notifications. At first, she thought it might be sympathy messages. Perhaps, if she played the role of the deceived fiancé, she could salvage her image. But when she opened the headlines, her blood ran cold. Model Ela Monroe linked to disgraced CEO's scandal. The other woman, Ela Monroe's role in the Weston collapse. Brands cut ties with Ela Monroe amid backlash. One by one, her contracts evaporated. A luxury cosmetics brand released a statement within hours. "We do not tolerate associations with unethical behavior. Effective immediately, we are severing all ties with Ms. Monroe." The jewelry company followed suit. By noon, 3 fashion houses had canceled upcoming campaigns. The internet was merciless. Social media buzzed with clips from the gala, Emma entering with Victor, Hila slipping her hand from Andrew's arm, Andrew shouting in desperation. But the most damning footage was the hallway confrontation, leaked by a hotel employee who had overheard everything. Millions watched as Emma calmly dismantled Hila with words that cut deeper than diamonds. "She thought she won because she took my husband," Emma's voice echoed in the viral clip. But what did she really win? A liar. A criminal. The comment section was brutal. She destroyed another woman's marriage for this? Pathetic. Emma's grace versus Hila's arrogance, night and day. Imagine being dumped by your sugar daddy and cancelled in one night. Hila scrolled until her vision blurred, tears stinging her eyes. She hurled her phone across the room, shattering it against the wall. But the noise didn't drown out the truth. The world had turned on her. For years, she had built her career on curated perfection. Designer gowns, red carpets, flawless smiles. Now, the same cameras that once adored her followed her every stumble. Paparazzi camped outside her apartment, shouting cruel questions. "Were you Andrew's accomplice? Did you know about the fraud? How does it feel to be the mistress who lost everything?" She tried to fight back. She called her agent, demanding damage control. But his voice was cold. "Hila, you're toxic right now. No brand wants your face attached to theirs. I suggest you lay low." Lay low. Two words that felt like a death sentence. For someone who lived on attention, invisibility was worse than poverty. As days passed, her friends stopped answering calls. Invitations dried up. The glossy magazine covers she dreamed of were replaced with tabloid spreads mocking her fall. One headline screamed, "From catwalk to cautionary tale." At night, Hila sat in her darkened apartment, the silence deafening. She poured herself expensive wine she could no longer afford. Staring at old photographs of herself on runways, draped in jewels, standing beside Andrew at glittering parties, she had thought she was untouchable. She had thought beauty was enough. But beauty, she realized too late, was from without loyalty, without respect. It was nothing. The cruelest twist, she had traded everything, her integrity, her reputation, her future, for Andrew Weston. And now he was gone, locked behind bars, leaving her with nothing but the ashes of borrowed glory. The world had moved on, already celebrating Emma as a symbol of resilience. Hila, once a queen of flashbulbs, was now a ghost, remembered only as a lesson in betrayal and downfall. And she hated Emma most of all, not because Emma destroyed her, but because Emma survived. The hospital room was dim, the lights lowered to a soft glow, the air filled with the quiet hum of machines. Outside, the city pulsed with noise and chaos, but in this room, time slowed to the rhythm of Emma's labored breaths. She gripped the rails of the hospital bed, sweat beading across her forehead, her face pale yet determined. Nurses bustled around her, voices calm but firm. "You're almost there, Emma. Just one more push." Victor stood at her side, his large hand wrapped around hers. She squeezed with every ounce of strength she had left, her nails digging into his skin. He didn't flinch. He only leaned closer, his voice steady, grounding her through the storm. "You can do this," he whispered, his forehead nearly touching hers. "You've already survived worse. This is where your fight turns into something beautiful." Tears welled in Emma's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe she was strong enough. But the pain was searing, the exhaustion overwhelming. "I can't," she gasped, shaking her head. "Yes, you can," Victor insisted, his tone unyielding but filled with warmth. "Look at me, Emma. You've walked through fire and didn't break. This is your moment. This is your victory." The words lit something inside her, a final spark of determination. With a cry that echoed every heartbreak, every betrayal, every silent night she had endured, Emma pushed. The room seemed to pause, and then suddenly the air was pierced by a sharp, miraculous sound. A baby's cry. Emma collapsed back against the pillows, tears flowing freely now, not of pain, but of relief, of joy, of release. The nurse held up the tiny, wriggling bundle, swaddled in white, its face scrunched and pink. "Congratulations," the nurse said softly. "It's a girl." Emma's breath caught. A girl. Her daughter. The baby was placed gently into her arms, and the moment their skin touched, Emma's world shifted. All the pain, the humiliation, the loneliness of the past months dissolved into the background. Her daughter's tiny fingers curled instinctively around hers, and Emma let out a sob so raw it shook her chest. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's just us now, you and me, and I promise, I'll never let you go." Victor stood above them, his eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. He reached out, brushing a gentle finger over the baby's head. "She's perfect," he said, his voice husky, "just like her mother." Emma looked up at him through tears. In his eyes she didn't see pity or obligation. She saw pride, respect, maybe even love. The nurse moved quietly, adjusting blankets, checking vitals, but the room felt cocooned, sacred. Emma kissed her daughter's forehead, inhaling the sweet, new scent of life. The weight of everything she had lost was still there, but now it was balanced by everything she had gained. For months, Andrew's betrayal had defined her. Now, holding her child, Emma knew she was defined by something else entirely: resilience, love, and the strength to begin again. Victor squeezed her shoulder gently. "She'll never have to doubt she's wanted. Not as long as you're her mother." Emma smiled through her tears, her voice soft but steady. "Not as long as we're here for her." The baby let out another cry, softer this time, as though agreeing. Emma laughed weakly, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. Outside the hospital, reporters still clamored for updates about Andrew Weston's scandal, about Ela Monroe's collapse. But in this room, none of that mattered. Here there was only a mother, her child, and the man who had chosen to stand beside them. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt not broken, not abandoned. She felt whole. 2 months after the hospital, Emma Weston stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing the woman staring back. Her hair, once unkempt from sleepless nights and tears, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. Her posture was straight, her eyes sharper, clearer. Gone was the timid, abandoned wife who whispered apologies into the darkness. In her place stood a woman reborn, mother, survivor, fighter. Motherhood had changed her, yes, but not in the way Andrew once feared. Rather than anchor her, her daughter had become her wings. Each sleepless night, rocking the tiny infant, each cry soothed, each lullaby hummed, had strengthened her resolve. Emma realized she wasn't just living for herself anymore. She was building a future for both of them. With Victor's quiet guidance, she began piecing together her next chapter. He never hovered, never dictated. Instead, he opened doors and let her choose which ones to walk through. He introduced her to contacts in philanthropy, in business, in media. "You have a voice people need to hear," he told her one evening as they walked through his private hangar, the roar of jets echoing around them. "Don't hide it anymore." Emma took his words to heart. She founded a nonprofit within weeks, the Phoenix Foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers abandoned by their partners. It wasn't just charity, it was her story, transformed into a mission. She poured her pain into purpose, speaking publicly about resilience, about survival, about the strength women carry even when the world tries to silence them. The media, once obsessed with Andrew's scandal, now found a new narrative. Headlines shifted. From betrayal to empowerment, Emma Weston's rise. Interviews followed. Magazines once filled with Ela's glossy photos now featured Emma holding her daughter, radiant and strong. She didn't flaunt wealth, didn't chase glamour. Instead, she embodied authenticity, and people responded with admiration. Her first major public appearance came at a fundraising gala, ironically hosted at the same hotel where Andrew's empire had collapsed. This time, Emma didn't enter as a trembling woman clinging to survival. She entered as a force. Her gown was elegant but commanding, a deep emerald that highlighted her strength. She carried her daughter in her arms as she stepped onto the stage, Victor by her side, not overshadowing her but standing proudly as her ally. The room, filled with business leaders and politicians, rose to its feet in applause. Emma's speech was short but powerful. 2 months ago I stood in this very ballroom, broken, judged, humiliated. But tonight I stand as proof that betrayal is not the end. It's the beginning. Every woman who has been told she is less than, every mother who has been left behind, you are not weak. You are fire, and fire rises. The standing ovation shook the chandeliers. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of Emma cradling her child, smiling through strength. Somewhere far away, Andrew watched the coverage from a prison television, bitterness gnawing at him. Ela, fading into obscurity, scrolled angrily through articles celebrating the woman she once mocked. But neither of them mattered anymore. Emma no longer needed revenge. Her existence, thriving, dignified, unstoppable, was revenge enough. Victor leaned close as the applause continued. "You realize you've just changed lives tonight," he murmured. Emma looked down at her daughter, then back at the crowd. "No," she said softly. "She changed mine. I'm just passing it on." And in that moment, Emma Weston, once discarded, now stood not just as a survivor, but as a symbol of hope. The night of the Phoenix Foundation's official launch became the closing chapter of Emma's long, painful story, and the first page of her new one. The ballroom was filled with applause, her speech still echoing in the hearts of everyone present. Emma stood center stage, her daughter nestled safely in her arms, Victor at her side. Cameras flashed not out of scandal, but admiration. For the first time in her life, Emma wasn't being pitied or whispered about, she was being celebrated. But while she rose, Andrew and Hila sank deeper into their own shadows. From a federal prison cell, Andrew watched the evening news. The tiny TV bolted to the wall showed Emma's glowing face, headlines praising her resilience. Around him, fellow inmates jeered. "That your wife?" one man mocked. "She looks a hell of a lot better without you." Andrew's jaw tightened, humiliation burning hotter than any court verdict. He had traded loyalty for vanity, family for greed, and ended with nothing but a number on an orange jumpsuit. Hila's fall was just as brutal. Blacklisted from fashion weeks, abandoned by sponsors, and hounded by paparazzi, she drifted from city to city chasing scraps of relevance. Once the darling of luxury campaigns, she was now a cautionary tale splashed across tabloids. Her social media following, once her kingdom, turned against her. Every post was flooded with comments: homewrecker, gold digger, forgotten already. She had wanted the world to envy her. Now the world mocked her. But Emma didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Their downfall was their own doing. She focused instead on the stage before her, on the hundreds of women who had come to hear her speak, on the donors writing checks to support abandoned mothers who needed hope. As the gala wound down, a journalist approached her gently. "Emma, if you could send one message to women who are where you were a year ago, scared, abandoned, broken, what would you tell them?" Emma looked into the camera, her daughter's tiny fingers curled around hers. Her voice was steady, but thick with emotion. "I would tell them this: you are not defined by the people who betray you. You are not broken because someone tried to discard you. You are stronger than you know. And the moment you stop believing the lies told about you is the moment you begin to rise." She paused, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I thought I lost everything, but in truth, I was being given a chance to build something better. And tonight, holding my daughter, I can tell you, it's possible. Healing is possible. Happiness is possible. You just have to believe you deserve it." The room erupted in applause, some guests openly weeping. Victor slipped his arm around her shoulders, not to overshadow her, but to share in the moment. His presence was steady, protective, but the spotlight was hers alone. Later that night, as Emma laid her daughter in the crib for the first time in her new home, a home filled with love, not lies, she stood by the window, watching the city lights. The same skyline that once made her feel small now felt like a canvas for possibility. Andrew and Hila were memories, footnotes in a story that belonged to her no longer. The only truth that mattered now was the sleeping child in the crib, the strength she had discovered, and the life she was building brick by brick. Emma Weston had been betrayed, humiliated, discarded, but she had risen. And in rising, she had given every woman watching her story a reason to believe that they could too. And so the curtain fell, not on tragedy, but on triumph. So that's how our story ends. My wonderful friends, you're still here with me, aren't you? If you've stayed until now, it means something in this story has touched your heart in its own way. And maybe, just maybe, it's because deep down we all know what it feels like to be broken, betrayed, and then slowly rebuilt stronger than before. The Stoics taught us that what truly matters is not what happens to us, but how we respond. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Emma's journey showed us exactly that: pain, abandonment, humiliation. Yet she rose, and in her rising, she found power and peace. Maybe you're going through something right now. Maybe life has knocked you down. Remember this: suffering can be a forge, and you can come out of the fire stronger, brighter, unstoppable. If this story touched you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who might need hope, and don't forget to subscribe. Stay with us, because together we'll keep finding stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of our own strength.